Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I moved to a small village in Maine a couple of years ago. It was a quiet place, the kind where everyone knows each other. I got a job teaching at the local school. It seemed like the perfect job, small classes, nice kids, friendly staff. I felt like I was finally settling into a good routine. But after a few months, I started noticing strange things. One of the kids, Billy, always seemed scared. He flinched whenever someone touched him, even just a pat on the back. I thought maybe he had some issues at home. Then I noticed that he wasn't the only one. There were a few kids who acted the same way. One day, Billy came to school with a bruise on his arm. I asked him about it, but he just looked at me with wide eyes and said he fell. I didn't believe him, but I didn't push it. I decided to keep an eye on things and see if I could figure out what was going on. A week later, I was staying late to grade papers. The school was empty except for me and Mr. Thompson, the janitor. He was an old guy, friendly enough, but something about him always seemed off to me. As I was finishing up, I heard voices coming from the principal's office. It was odd because it was almost 9 p.m. and the principal had left hours ago. I crept down the hall and listened. I could hear Mr. Thompson and someone else talking in low voices. They mentioned Billy's name and a few other kids. My heart started pounding. I couldn't hear everything, but what I did catch made my blood run cold. They were talking about keeping the kids quiet and making sure no one found out what was going on. I quickly left the school, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Should I go to the police? What if they didn't believe me? I decided to gather more evidence first. Over the next few days, I noticed more things. Kids being taken out of class for special sessions with the principal or Mr. Thompson. Kids who seemed scared to go home. I started taking notes, writing down everything I saw and heard. I even managed to snap a few photos without anyone noticing. One night, I stayed late again, hoping to catch more of their conversation. This time, I brought a small voice recorder. I hid in a closet near the principal's office and waited. Sure enough, they were there again, talking about the kids. I recorded everything, my heart pounding the whole time. As I was leaving, Mr. Thompson came around the corner and saw me. His eyes narrowed, and he asked what I was doing there so late. I stammered something about grading papers and hurried out of the school. I knew I was in trouble. He had seen me, and he probably suspected something. The next day, I found a note in my mailbox. It was a warning, telling me to mind my own business or else. I was terrified. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I decided to go to the police with the recordings and my notes. The police were skeptical at first, but when they heard the recordings and saw my notes, they took me seriously. They promised to investigate, but I was still scared. I didn't know if they could protect me. A few days later, I noticed a car following me. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night, I heard noises outside my house. I looked out the window and saw a figure standing in my yard. My heart almost stopped. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. The police put a patrol car outside my house, but I still didn't feel safe. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for something to happen. A week later, the police raided the school. They arrested the principal, Mr. Thompson, and a few other staff members. They found evidence of the child abuse ring and took the kids into protective custody. It was over, but I still couldn't shake the fear. Even though the people responsible were arrested, I didn't feel safe. I decided to leave the village and move back to the city. It was hard leaving the kids, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I couldn't risk my life. It took a long time for me to feel normal again. I still have nightmares about that time, but I try to remind myself that I did the right thing. I helped those kids, and I stopped something terrible from continuing. I always wanted a classic car. It was a dream of mine for years. So, when I found one for sale in Philadelphia, I jumped at the chance. It was a 1967 Mustang, in pretty good shape, and the price was reasonable. The seller, a guy named Mike, seemed nice enough. He was eager to sell and told me he needed the money quickly. I didn't ask too many questions. I met Mike at a rundown garage on the outskirts of town. The place looked abandoned, but the Mustang was there, gleaming under a layer of dust. We made the deal, and he handed over the keys. I drove the car home, feeling like I had just scored the deal of a lifetime. The first sign of trouble came the next day. I was at a red light when a black SUV pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and a guy inside stared at me, hard. I looked away, trying to ignore him, but I could feel his eyes burning into me. The light turned green, and I drove off quickly, but the SUV followed me for several blocks before finally turning away. That night, I heard noises outside my house. It sounded like someone was messing with the car. I grabbed a flashlight and went to check, but by the time I got outside, no one was there. The car was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A few days later, I was driving to work when the SUV appeared again. This time, it was right on my tail. I tried to lose them, weaving through traffic, but they stayed with me. Finally, I pulled into a crowded parking lot and ran inside a store, hoping they wouldn't follow. They didn't, but when I came back out, there was a note on my windshield. It said, "We know who you are." I decided to call Mike. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried a few more times, but no luck. I started to get really worried. That evening, I noticed the SUV parked down the street from my house. They were watching me. The next morning, I found my tires slashed. I called a tow truck and had the car taken to a nearby garage. The mechanic told me it would take a few days to get new tires and fix some other minor issues. I felt a bit of relief, thinking maybe things would calm down without the car around. But that night, someone broke into my house. I woke up to the sound of shattering glass and footsteps downstairs. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept down the stairs, heart pounding. There were two men in my living room, rummaging through my stuff. They saw me and one of them lunged. I swung the bat, hitting him in the side. He went down, but the other guy pulled a knife. I backed up, trying to keep the bat between us. He slashed at me, and I felt a sharp pain in my arm. I swung the bat again, hitting his arm and knocking the knife away. He tackled me, and we both went down hard. I managed to get on top of him and hit him again until he stopped moving. I grabbed my phone and called the police. They arrived within minutes and arrested the two men. I was taken to the hospital, where I got stitches for the cut on my arm. The police questioned me about the men, but I didn't know anything. They took my statement and promised to look into it. A few days later, I got a call from a detective. He told me that the men who broke into my house were part of a gang, and they were looking for something they thought Mike had left in the car. He wouldn't say what, but it sounded serious. The detective advised me to stay somewhere safe until they could sort things out. I stayed with a friend for a while, hoping the police would catch the rest of the gang. They kept the Mustang as evidence, which was fine by me. I didn't want anything to do with it anymore. Eventually, the police busted the gang, and things started to calm down. They returned the car, but I sold it as soon as I could. I didn't want any more trouble. I had been searching for a unique piece of jewelry for months, something special that I could wear on my birthday. After browsing countless stores and websites, I found a beautiful necklace on Craigslist. It was a vintage piece, gold with a delicate design, and the price was surprisingly reasonable. The seller, a woman named Karen, seemed polite and responsive through our emails. We arranged to meet at a cafe in downtown Phoenix. The cafe was busy when I arrived, bustling with people enjoying their Saturday morning coffee. Karen was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked normal, mid-30s, dressed casually. We exchanged pleasantries, and she handed me the necklace. It was even more beautiful in person, and I couldn't believe my luck. After a bit of small talk, I handed her the cash, and she left with a friendly wave. Feeling thrilled with my purchase, I wore the necklace that evening. It drew compliments from friends at my birthday dinner, and I felt a special connection to it. Over the next few days, I noticed a few strange things. Once, I thought I saw someone following me while I was out shopping. Another time, my car alarm went off in the middle of the night, but there was no sign of forced entry. I dismissed these incidents as coincidences, not thinking they were related. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise outside my apartment window. I lived on the ground floor, and the sound was distinct, like someone trying to open the window. My heart raced, and I grabbed my phone to call the police. Before I could dial, the noise stopped. I peeked through the blinds but saw nothing. It took me hours to fall asleep, my mind racing with possibilities. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to stay home from work and keep an eye on my apartment. Around noon, I saw a man loitering across the street. He was wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, standing too casually for too long. I watched him from behind the curtains, and after what felt like forever, he walked away. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, but the fear lingered. That evening, I received a message from an unknown number. It said, "Enjoying the necklace?" My blood ran cold. How did they know? I replied, asking who it was, but got no response. I decided to call Karen, thinking maybe she had given my number to someone. The phone rang, but no one answered. I left a message, explaining the situation and asking her to call me back. Hours later, I heard a knock on my door. It was Karen. She looked different, more anxious than the cheerful woman I met at the cafe. She said she needed to talk. I let her in, and she immediately asked if anyone had contacted me about the necklace. I showed her the message, and she sighed, looking terrified. Karen explained that the necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It belonged to a dangerous man she had once been involved with. She stole it from him to escape their relationship and sold it to me to cover her tracks. Now, it seemed he had found out and was coming after both of us. My fear turned into panic as she spoke, realizing the danger I was in. We decided to go to the police. At the station, we explained everything, from the sale of the necklace to the threatening message. The officers took our statements seriously and advised us to stay somewhere safe. They would investigate, but there was no guarantee they could catch the man quickly. Karen and I left the station, feeling a bit more secure but still on edge. She suggested we stay at her friend's place out of town for a few days. We packed our essentials and drove to our friend's house, a small, secluded place in the desert. The isolation was eerie, but we felt safer away from the city. The first night was restless. Every sound outside made us jump. In the morning, we discussed our next steps. Karen remembered a safe deposit box where she had hidden some documents that might help the police track down her ex. We decided to retrieve them, despite the risk. Driving back to the city, we were cautious, checking for anyone following us. At the bank, Karen retrieved the documents without issue. As we left, I noticed a familiar figure in the parking lot, the man in the hoodie. My heart pounded as we hurried back to the car and sped off. Back at the house, we handed the documents to the police. They assured us they would use them to locate the man and urged us to stay hidden. That night, the isolation of the desert felt more like a prison. We barely slept, every creak and groan of the house setting us on edge. Early the next morning, we were jolted awake by the sound of breaking glass. He had found us. We ran to the back door, but he was already inside, his face twisted with rage. Karen screamed, and I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy lamp, and swung it at him. He staggered but didn't fall. In the chaos, Karen managed to grab her phone and call 911. We barricaded ourselves in a bedroom, pushing furniture against the door. He pounded on it, shouting threats. The minutes felt like hours until we heard the distant wail of sirens. The man's shouts turned to curses, and then silence. We stayed put, trembling, until we heard the police announcing themselves. They found him hiding in the house and arrested him. The officers escorted us out, assuring us we were safe now. The relief was overwhelming, but the trauma of the experience lingered. Karen and I decided to part ways for our safety. I moved to a different apartment, changed my number, and tried to rebuild my sense of security. Months later, I still have the necklace, a reminder of the ordeal. I moved to a small town in Ohio a few months ago. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and I thought it would be a good place to start over. I got a job at the local diner, and it didn't take long for me to feel like part of the community. People were friendly and welcoming. One evening, a man named Mark came into the diner. He was charming and good-looking, with a smile that made my heart race. He started coming in regularly, and we struck up conversations. Soon enough, he asked me out on a date. I was thrilled. He seemed perfect. Our relationship moved quickly. Mark was attentive and sweet. He always had a way of making me feel special. He told me he was new in town too, looking for a fresh start after a rough patch in his life. I didn't press for details, thinking we all had our pasts. One night, we were watching a movie at his place when there was a loud knock on the door. Mark's face turned pale, and he told me to stay quiet. He went to the door and spoke in hushed tones with whoever was outside. I couldn't hear much, but I caught the word trouble and leave. When he came back, he tried to brush it off, saying it was just a friend needing help. But I could tell he was shaken. Over the next few days, Mark became more anxious and jumpy. He avoided answering his phone and seemed to be watching over his shoulder constantly. I asked him what was wrong, but he kept saying it was nothing. I started to feel uneasy. Something wasn't right. Then, one afternoon, I was cleaning up at the diner when I overheard two regulars talking about a news story. They mentioned a fugitive from another state who was wanted for serious crimes. My heart sank when they described him. It sounded a lot like Mark. I felt sick. Could it really be him? That evening, I went to Mark's place, determined to confront him. I found him packing a bag. He looked up, and I saw fear in his eyes. He admitted it. He told me he had been running from his past, trying to build a new life. But now it was catching up with him. He begged me to come with him, to leave everything behind and start over somewhere else. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to run away with him, but I was also terrified. I told him I needed time to think and left his place, promising to call him later. I drove around aimlessly, my mind racing. Finally, I decided to go to the police. They needed to know, and I needed to be safe. At the station, I told them everything. They took me seriously and assured me they would handle it. They asked me to stay somewhere safe and out of sight. I decided to stay with a friend for the night. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was frantic. He knew I had gone to the police. He was furious and scared. He said he was coming for me. My heart pounded. I told my friend, and we called the police immediately. We waited in the dark, every sound making us jump. Minutes felt like hours. Then we heard footsteps outside. My friend whispered that the police were on their way, but I wasn't sure they would get there in time. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on the door. Mark was shouting my name, demanding I come out. I felt trapped. My friend grabbed a kitchen knife and stood by the door, ready to defend us. The banging got louder, more frantic. I could hear Mark's anger and desperation. I was terrified he would break the door down. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed outside. The banging stopped, replaced by shouting and commotion. The police had arrived just in time. They arrested Mark, who was still yelling and struggling. I felt a wave of relief, but also sadness. This was the man I had fallen for, now being taken away in handcuffs. The police thanked me for coming forward. They said I had done the right thing. But it didn't feel like it. I was heartbroken and scared, unsure of what the future held. I stayed with my friend for a few more days, trying to process everything. Life in the small town changed after that. People knew what had happened, and while they were supportive, I felt the weight of their pity. It was hard to move on, but I knew I had to. I focused on my job, my friends, and slowly started to rebuild my life. Mark's trial was swift. He was sentenced to a long time in prison for his past crimes. I never saw him again. The experience left me wary and cautious, but I learned to trust my instincts and value my safety above all. Living in a close-knit community had its challenges, but it also meant I had support when I needed it most. I stayed in the town, finding strength in the connections I made and the lessons I learned. I decided to sell my motorcycle. It wasn't anything fancy, but I needed the money. I put up an ad on Craigslist and waited. It didn't take long for someone to respond. His name was Mike, and he seemed like a nice enough guy. We exchanged a few emails, and he agreed to come over and take a look. Mike showed up right on time. He was a tall guy with a friendly smile. We chatted a bit about the bike, and he seemed genuinely interested. After a short test ride, he agreed to buy it. He handed me the cash, and I gave him the keys and the title. Everything seemed fine, and I was relieved the sale went smoothly. A few days later, I started getting strange texts from Mike. He said the bike wasn't running properly and accused me of selling him a lemon. I apologized and told him it had always worked fine for me. He didn't seem satisfied and kept sending messages. The tone of his texts got angrier, and he started accusing me of scamming him. I tried to ignore the texts, hoping he would give up. But then I started noticing a car parked outside my apartment building. It was there every night, and I had a gut feeling it was Mike. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I saw the car again. This time, I saw Mike sitting inside, staring right at me. My heart raced, and I quickly went inside, locking the door behind me. The texts from Mike continued, becoming more threatening. He said he knew where I lived and that he would make me pay. I decided to call the police. They took my report but said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually did something. That didn't make me feel any safer. The next night, I heard noises outside my window. I peeked through the blinds and saw Mike in my yard, looking around. I called the police again, and this time they arrived quickly. They found Mike in my yard and questioned him. He claimed he was just there to talk to me about the bike. The police warned him to stay away from me and let him go. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The following evening, I came home to find my front door slightly open. My stomach dropped. I cautiously stepped inside and saw that my place had been trashed. Drawers were pulled out, papers scattered everywhere. I called the police again, and they came to investigate. I told them about Mike, but they couldn't find any evidence linking him to the break-in. I was terrified. I couldn't stay there anymore, so I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. For the next few days, I lived in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder. I didn't hear from Mike, and the car outside my apartment was gone. I started to relax, thinking maybe he had given up. One night, while staying in my friend's place, I woke up to a noise outside the window. I crept over and looked out. There was Mike, staring right at me. I felt a wave of panic. I woke my friend, and we called the police. They arrived quickly and caught Mike trying to break in. This time, they arrested him. Mike was charged with stalking and attempted burglary. I had to testify in court, which was terrifying, but I was relieved when he was sentenced to jail time. After the trial, I moved to a new apartment and changed my phone number. It took a while, but I finally started to feel safe again. Looking back, I can't believe how quickly things escalated. I never expected selling a motorcycle could lead to something so terrifying. I've learned to be more cautious with transactions like that and to trust my instincts if something feels off. I had owned that old boat for years, but it was time to let it go. Living in Minneapolis, I figured someone would appreciate it more. So, I put it up for sale. It didn't take long for someone to show interest. A guy named Dave contacted me, saying he wanted to buy it. He seemed nice enough, and we agreed on a price. We met at the marina where I kept the boat. Dave inspected it, asked a few questions, and then handed me the cash. Everything seemed legit. I felt a little sad watching him sail away, but also relieved to have the money. I thought that was the end of it. A week later, I got a call from Dave. He said there was an issue with the boat's paperwork and asked if we could meet to sort it out. I didn't see any harm in it, so we arranged to meet at a diner near the marina. When I arrived, Dave was already there, but he wasn't alone. Another guy was with him, a tough-looking man who didn't say much. Dave started talking about some missing documents and asked if I had them. I was confused because I gave him everything when he bought the boat. He then mentioned something about needing to access a specific compartment on the boat that required my help. I didn't understand what he meant, but I agreed to go with him to check it out. When we got to the marina, it was pretty deserted. We walked to the boat, and Dave pointed out a small hatch I'd never really noticed before. He insisted there was something important in there that needed my attention. As I started to open it, the tough guy grabbed me and shoved me into the cabin. I was stunned and tried to fight back, but he was much stronger. They tied me up and started searching the boat frantically. I kept asking what was going on, but they ignored me. After what felt like hours, they found a hidden compartment stuffed with packages. That's when it hit me. Drugs. Dave looked at me with a mix of anger and desperation. He accused me of trying to double-cross him, saying I knew about the drugs all along. I had no idea what he was talking about. I bought the boat years ago from an old friend and never imagined anything like this. They argued about what to do with me. The tough guy wanted to get rid of me, but Dave wasn't so sure. They decided to keep me tied up while they figured it out. They left me alone in the cabin, but I could hear them talking outside. They were planning to use the boat to transport the drugs and didn't want any loose ends. My heart was pounding. I knew I had to get out of there. I managed to wiggle my hands free and started looking for something to use as a weapon. I found a rusty old knife and quietly made my way to the deck. The two of them were still arguing, and I saw my chance. I snuck up behind the tough guy and jabbed the knife into his leg. He screamed and fell, giving me a split second to run. Dave tried to grab me, but I was quicker. I ran down the dock, not looking back. My only thought was to get to safety. I made it to my car and drove straight to the police station. I told them everything. At first, they seemed skeptical, but when I described the boat and the drugs, they took me seriously. They sent officers to the marina, but by the time they got there, Dave and the tough guy were gone. The boat was still there, with the drugs inside. The police launched an investigation, and I spent hours answering questions. They eventually found out that the boat had been used by a smuggling ring before I bought it. The drugs were hidden so well that I never knew they were there. Dave and his partner were part of that ring and thought I was trying to cheat them. The police put me in protective custody for a while, in case they came after me. I moved to a new place and changed my routines, constantly looking over my shoulder. It took months before I started to feel somewhat safe again. Looking back, I realized how close I came to losing everything. Selling that boat seemed like a simple transaction, but it nearly cost me my life. I decided to sell my old camera equipment to make some extra cash. I posted an ad on Craigslist and got a response almost immediately. The guy seemed legit, said he was a student who needed a good camera for his photography class. We agreed to meet in a busy coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan. When I arrived, I saw a young guy, maybe in his early 20s, sitting at a table with a backpack. He waved me over and introduced himself as Mike. He was polite, asked me about the camera and why I was selling it. I explained that I had upgraded to a new model and didn't need this one anymore. Mike examined the camera carefully, asking all the right questions. He seemed genuinely interested and knowledgeable. We talked for a bit, and he offered to buy it for the price I had listed. I was relieved. It had been sitting in my closet for months. Mike then suggested we grab a coffee while he transferred the money via an app. I agreed, and we went to the counter. He ordered 2 lattes, and we sat back down. As we waited, he kept the conversation going, talking about his photography projects and school. It was all very normal, and I didn't suspect anything. When our drinks arrived, I took a sip of mine. It tasted a bit off, but I didn't think much of it. We continued chatting, but soon, I started to feel dizzy. My vision blurred, and I struggled to keep my eyes open. The last thing I remember was Mike's face, looking concerned, asking if I was okay. I woke up in a dark alley, lying on the ground. My head was pounding, and I felt nauseous. My pockets were empty, my wallet, phone, and keys were gone. The camera, of course, was also missing. I struggled to my feet, trying to piece together what had happened. Stumbling out of the alley, I made my way to the nearest street. I flagged down a cab and asked the driver to take me to the nearest police station. At the station, I reported the robbery, describing Mike and everything that had happened. The officers were sympathetic but said it would be tough to track him down without more information. Feeling helpless, I asked to use their phone to call a friend. My friend Jenny came to pick me up. She was shocked and worried, insisting I go to the hospital. At the hospital, they confirmed I had been drugged, probably with something slipped into my drink. Over the next few days, I tried to follow up with the police, but there was no progress. Mike had disappeared without a trace. I felt violated and paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, fearing he might come back for more. The thought that he had planned everything so meticulously made it even worse. I spent hours online, looking for any information on similar incidents, hoping to find a clue. I found forums and articles about people getting scammed and robbed through Craigslist, but nothing that matched my experience exactly. It seemed like Mike was a pro, and I was just another one of his victims. Despite the police's lack of leads, I refused to give up. I went back to the coffee shop, asking the staff if they remembered anything unusual about Mike. One of the baristas recalled him coming in a few times before, always alone, always sitting at the same table. It was a small lead, but it was something. I convinced the manager to let me look at their security footage. It took some convincing, but eventually he agreed. We spent hours going through the tapes, and finally, we found a clear shot of Mike's face. I took a screenshot with my friend's phone and brought it back to the police. With the photo, the police were able to start a more thorough investigation. They put out a bulletin with Mike's picture, hoping someone would recognize him. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing. I tried to move on, but it was hard. Every time I saw a young guy with a backpack, my heart would race. One night, I got a call from the police. They had arrested a suspect matching Mike's description. I went down to the station and confirmed it was him. They found my camera and some of my other belongings in his apartment. It was a small victory, but it didn't erase the fear and violation I felt. Mike was charged with multiple counts of robbery and drugging his victims. During his trial, it came out that he had done this to several other people. Knowing I wasn't alone didn't make me feel any better, but at least he was off the streets. Even though he was caught, the experience left a lasting impact. I became more cautious, more suspicious of strangers. Selling the camera had seemed like a simple, harmless transaction, but it turned into a nightmare. I stopped using Craigslist and stuck to safer, more secure methods for buying and selling things. Living in a big city like New York, you think you're prepared for anything, but this showed me how vulnerable we can all be. I worked as a receptionist at a small hotel, a quiet place on the edge of town. Most nights were uneventful, with few guests and nothing much happening. That changed when the guest in room 213 checked in. The man seemed ordinary enough, checked in late at night, didn't say much. He paid for a week up front, then took his key and went to his room. I didn't think much of it at first. We had guests like him all the time. After a few days, I realized I hadn't seen him since he checked in. Normally, guests would come and go, at least leave the room for meals or a walk. But room 213 was silent, no sound, no movement. It started to bother me. I checked the computer and saw that his keycard hadn't been used to leave or enter the room since the night he arrived. I thought maybe he was just keeping to himself, but it still seemed strange. On the fourth day, I decided to check on him. I knocked on the door of room 213, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. I considered using the master key, but I didn't want to invade his privacy. I went back to the front desk, still feeling uneasy. Later that night, I noticed something even stranger. The lock record showed the door to room 213 had been opened several times during the past few days, but not by the guest's key card. It was opened by the master key, the one only staff had access to. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone had been entering room 213, but it wasn't the guest. I decided to wait until my shift ended and then go check the room myself. At the end of my shift, I grabbed the master key and headed up to the second floor. The hallway was silent, the dim lights flickering slightly. I reached room 213 and took a deep breath before unlocking the door. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. I fumbled for the light switch and turned it on. The bed was made, everything seemed normal at first glance. But then I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. I walked over to the closet and pulled the door open. Inside, I found a pile of clothes that didn't belong to the guest, men's and women's clothing, all mixed together. There was also a strange smell, like something rotten. My heart was pounding as I turned around to check the bathroom. The door was closed, and I could see a faint light coming from underneath. I knocked, but there was no response. I slowly pushed the door open and was hit by the stench of decay. The guest was there, lying in the bathtub, eyes wide open, but lifeless. His skin was pale, and he looked like he had been dead for days. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. That's when I heard a noise behind me. I turned around and saw a man standing in the doorway. He wasn't a guest. He was dressed in dark clothes, his face partially hidden by a hood. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer. The man didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes cold and empty. I tried to run, but he was faster. He grabbed me by the arm and pulled me into the room, slamming the door shut. I struggled, but he was too strong. He shoved me against the wall, his hand over my mouth. "Stay quiet," he hissed, "or you'll end up like him." I nodded, too terrified to do anything else. He let go of me and started searching the room, pulling out drawers, tossing things around. I didn't know what he was looking for, but I knew I had to get out of there. I waited until he was distracted, then made a dash for the door. I managed to unlock it and ran down the hallway, my heart racing. I didn't stop until I was outside, in the parking lot, gasping for breath. I called the police, and they arrived within minutes. They searched the room and found the man hiding in the closet. He was arrested, and the police later told me he was wanted for multiple murders. The guest in room 213 had been one of his victims. I never went back to that hotel. I couldn't. The memory of that night still haunts me, the feeling of being watched, the smell of death, the cold eyes of a killer. I'll never forget it, and I hope no one else ever has to go through something like that. I was stuck at the train station during one of the worst storms I had ever seen. The rain was pounding against the windows, and the wind howled like a wild animal. I had missed my train home, and the next one wasn't due for hours. The station was almost empty, just me and a few other unlucky souls stranded by the weather. I sat on a cold, metal bench, watching the rain. The lights flickered occasionally, making the shadows in the corners dance. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and tried to get comfortable, but the bench was hard, and the air was damp and chilly. After a while, I noticed a man walking towards me. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark uniform. I assumed he was a security guard, though I hadn't seen him before. He had a badge clipped to his chest and a flashlight in his hand. "Evening," he said, his voice deep and slightly raspy. "You waiting for the next train?" "Yeah," I replied. Got stuck here because of the storm. Bad one, isn't it? He glanced at the windows, the rain still hammering down. Name's Carl. I'm the night security here. I'm Laura, I said. Nice to meet you. He nodded and sat down on the bench across from me. His presence was a bit unsettling, but I figured he was just doing his job. We sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the storm. Not many people here tonight, he said finally, looking around the empty station. Most folks cleared out before it got this bad. Yeah, it's pretty deserted, I agreed. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. So, Laura, where are you headed? Home, I said. Just trying to get home. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. You know, it's not safe for a young woman to be alone in a place like this. Lots of strange people around. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he said it made me uneasy. I'm fine, I said quickly. Just waiting for my train. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Well, if you need anything, I'll be around. He stood up and walked away, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. I watched him disappear into the shadows, feeling a sense of relief once he was gone. But the relief didn't last long. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. I tried to distract myself by reading a book, but I couldn't focus. Every time the lights flickered, I glanced around, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me. The minutes dragged on, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to stretch my legs. I walked down the platform, trying to shake off the unease. As I passed a row of lockers, I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly, but no one was there. Just the empty station and the sound of the storm. I told myself I was being paranoid. There was no reason to be scared. But as I turned to head back to my bench, I saw him again. Carl, standing at the far end of the platform, watching me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were dark and intense. I forced a smile and nodded at him, hoping to appear calm. He didn't respond, just kept staring. I hurried back to my seat, my heart pounding in my chest. Something wasn't right. I needed to find a way out of there, but with the storm raging outside, I had nowhere to go. I decided to go to the restroom, hoping to buy some time and gather my thoughts. The restroom was down a dimly lit hallway, and as I walked, I felt like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. Inside the restroom, I splashed some water on my face and took a deep breath. I needed to stay calm and think clearly. But when I stepped out, Carl was there, leaning against the wall. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Yeah, just needed a break," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a step closer, and I could see the cold glint in his eyes. "You know, the storm's getting worse. Might be a good idea to find somewhere safer to wait." "I'm fine here," I insisted, backing away. His smile faded, replaced by a hard, menacing look. "I don't think you understand. It's not safe here." My heart was racing now. I needed to get away from him. "I'll take my chances," I said, turning to leave. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "I'm not giving you a choice," he growled. I yanked my arm free and ran, my footsteps echoing in the empty station. I could hear him behind me, his boots pounding on the floor. I didn't know where to go, but I had to get away. I darted down a hallway and into a storage room, slamming the door shut behind me. I looked around, my eyes searching for something to block the door. I spotted a heavy shelf and pushed it against the door, my hands shaking. I could hear Carl outside, trying the handle and then pounding on the door. "Let me in, Laura," he shouted. "You're only making this harder on yourself." I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I needed to find a way to call for help. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. The storm had knocked out the cell towers. I was trapped. I heard a crash outside and realized he was trying to break down the door. I had to think fast. I looked around the room and spotted a small window near the ceiling. It was a tight fit, but it was my only chance. I climbed up on a stack of boxes and pushed the window open. The rain and wind hit me immediately, but I didn't care. I squeezed through the window, cutting my hands on the glass, and dropped down onto the wet pavement outside. I could hear Carl shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran through the storm, my clothes soaked and my heart pounding. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away from him. I finally saw the lights of a nearby building and ran towards it. It was a small diner, and the sight of it filled me with relief. I burst through the door, gasping for breath. The few people inside turned to look at me, their faces filled with concern. "Help," I managed to say. "There's a man. He's after me." The staff quickly called the police, and they arrived within minutes. I told them everything, and they assured me I was safe now. They found Carl still trying to break into the storage room, and he was arrested. The ordeal left me shaken, but I was grateful to be alive. I never thought a simple trip could turn into a nightmare, but it did. I'll never forget the look in Carl's eyes, the fear and anger. It's something that will haunt me forever. I decided to camp alone on a remote beach in Florida. I wanted to get away from everything for a few days, clear my head, and enjoy some peace. I brought my boat, some supplies, and set up camp right by the water. The first day was perfect. The weather was warm, and the sound of the waves was soothing. I spent the day fishing, swimming, and just relaxing. As the sun set, I made a fire and cooked the fish I caught. I felt at peace, away from the noise and stress of daily life. The night was clear, and the stars were bright. I stayed up for a while, just enjoying the quiet before heading to my tent to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind or an animal, but then I heard it again. It was a soft rustling, like someone walking on the sand. I unzipped my tent and peeked outside, but I couldn't see anything. The fire had died down to embers, and everything was dark. I listened for a while longer, but the sound stopped, so I went back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I felt uneasy. I got out of my tent and walked down to the water. My boat was gone. Panic hit me like a punch in the gut. I looked around and saw footprints all around my tent. They weren't mine. Someone had been here during the night. I tried to calm down and think. I was on a small island, miles from the mainland. Without my boat, I was stranded. I had enough food and water for a couple of days, but after that, I would be in trouble. I had to find a way to escape. I spent the day looking for any sign of my boat. I walked around the entire island, but there was no trace of it. The footprints led to the water and then disappeared. It was like whoever took it vanished into thin air. I felt a growing sense of dread. I was completely alone, and someone had intentionally left me here. That night, I built a larger fire, hoping it would deter anyone from coming near my camp. I didn't sleep much, jumping at every sound. The wind rustled the leaves, and the waves crashed on the shore, but every noise seemed amplified. My mind kept going back to the footprints and the missing boat. The next morning, I decided to explore the island more thoroughly. Maybe there was something I had missed. I found an old path leading into the trees and followed it. It led to a small clearing with an abandoned cabin. It looked like it had been there for years, falling apart and covered in vines. Inside the cabin, I found a few old tools and a dusty, moldy mattress. There was nothing that could help me. As I was about to leave, I noticed a small, carved symbol on the wall. It looked recent, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Someone had been here not long ago. I hurried back to my camp, feeling more paranoid than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I didn't even bother trying to sleep. I sat by the fire, clutching a makeshift spear I had fashioned from a piece of driftwood. The hours dragged by, and every shadow seemed to move. Just before dawn, I heard the sound again. Footsteps, coming from the direction of the cabin. I stood up, heart pounding, and peered into the darkness. I could barely make out a figure moving toward me. They stopped at the edge of the firelight, just out of reach. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they took a step forward into the light. It was a man, his face hidden in the shadows. He just stood there, staring at me. I tightened my grip on the spear, ready to defend myself. "What do you want?" I demanded. Still, no answer. The man just stood there, watching me. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't follow. I was too scared to move. When the sun finally rose, I felt a small sense of relief. I needed to find a way off this island before the man came back. I decided to build a raft from the driftwood scattered along the beach. It took all day, but I managed to lash together enough pieces to make something that might float. As night fell, I dragged the raft to the water's edge. I didn't know if it would hold, but I had to try. I pushed it into the water and climbed on. It wobbled but stayed afloat. I used a piece of wood as a paddle and started making my way toward the mainland. The water was calm, but the journey was slow. Every splash of the paddle echoed in the silence, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the man following me. Hours passed, and I began to lose hope. The mainland still seemed so far away. Just as I was about to give up, I saw lights on the horizon. I paddled with renewed energy, the lights growing brighter and closer. Eventually, I reached the shore, exhausted but alive. I stumbled onto the beach and collapsed, grateful to be off that island. I never found out who the man was or why he took my boat. I was staying at this old motel just off the highway. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was cheap, and I needed a place to crash for the night. The room smelled a little musty, and the carpet had seen better days, but it was fine for one night. I dropped my bag on the bed and decided to take a shower to wash off the long drive. After my shower, I was getting ready for bed when I heard a weird noise. It sounded like something scraping against the wall. I figured it was just the pipes or something, but it kept happening. It was coming from the closet. I opened the closet door, expecting to see a rat or something, but it was empty. Then I noticed a small crack in the back wall. Curious, I pushed on the wall, and to my surprise, it moved. There was a hidden door. My heart was racing as I pushed it open and found a narrow passage behind it. It was dark, and the air was colder back there. I hesitated but grabbed my phone for light and stepped inside. The passage was tight, and I had to crouch to get through. The walls were rough, and it smelled damp. As I moved further in, I found another door, this one made of metal. It creaked loudly when I opened it, and I stepped into a larger space, like a tunnel. There were more doors along the sides, and a faint light was coming from the end of the tunnel. I walked slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. The tunnel led to a room that looked like some kind of office. There were papers and photos scattered everywhere. I picked up a photo and felt my stomach drop. It was a picture of a woman, tied up and gagged. She looked terrified. I dropped the photo and backed away, feeling sick. I needed to get out of there, but I heard voices coming from another tunnel. I ducked behind a stack of boxes, my heart pounding in my chest. Two men walked in, dressed in uniforms like the motel staff. They were talking about needing to clean up before morning. I felt a chill run down my spine. These guys were the ones doing this. I waited until they left, then I moved quickly, trying to find my way back. The tunnels were like a maze, and I was getting turned around. I found another room, this one with a row of lockers. One of the lockers was slightly open, and inside, I saw a pile of wallets and purses. These belonged to the people in the photos. I finally found the passage that led back to my room. I slipped through and closed the hidden door behind me, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there and call the police. I grabbed my bag and opened the door to my room, but one of the men from the tunnels was standing there. He looked as shocked as I felt. I tried to play it cool, saying I was just going out for a drink, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back into the room. I struggled, but he was strong. He dragged me towards the closet, but I kicked and screamed, knocking over a lamp. The noise must have startled him because he let go for a second, and I ran. I sprinted down the hall and out the front door of the motel. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station down the road. I burst in, panting and terrified, and told the clerk to call the police. I must have looked crazy, but he called them. When the police arrived, I told them everything. They went back to the motel, and I waited, shaking and scared. It felt like hours before they came back. They found the tunnels and the evidence. The men were arrested. The motel was shut down. It took a while for me to feel safe again. I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. I was just lucky I found that passage and got out in time. I still get nightmares about it sometimes. Now, I always check the room before I settle in, and I stay away from old motels. I'll never forget that night. Exploring the outback had always been a dream of mine. After a few days in Sydney, I rented a car and drove out into the vast wilderness. The scenery was breathtaking, with red dirt roads stretching out to the horizon and the occasional kangaroo hopping by. It felt like an adventure I had always wanted. One afternoon, I pulled over at a small roadside stop to stretch my legs. As I was getting back into my car, an old pickup truck pulled up beside me. The driver was a middle-aged man with a friendly smile. He struck up a conversation, asking where I was headed. We chatted for a bit, and he offered to show me a shortcut to a beautiful, secluded spot he said tourists rarely visited. I hesitated, but he seemed genuine enough, so I agreed to follow him. We drove for about an hour, further and further away from the main road. The landscape became more desolate, and I started feeling uneasy. Finally, he pulled over and signaled for me to do the same. I got out of my car, and he pointed to a dirt track leading into the bush. "Just a short walk that way," he said, "and you'll find a hidden gem." I thanked him and walked down the track as he drove away. After a few minutes, I realized I couldn't see the road anymore. There was no hidden gem, just endless bushland. Panic set in when I tried to retrace my steps and found the path had disappeared. I was alone in the middle of nowhere. I shouted for help, but there was no response. My phone had no signal, and I had no idea which direction to go. Hours passed as I wandered, the sun beating down on me. I regretted not bringing more water. My mouth was dry, and I could feel the first signs of dehydration setting in. As night fell, the temperature dropped. I found a spot under a tree and tried to rest, but every sound made me jump. The rustling of leaves, the distant calls of animals, everything seemed like a threat. I barely slept, my mind racing with thoughts of how I had been so easily fooled. In the morning, I decided to keep walking, hoping to find some sign of civilization. My legs were sore, and my feet were blistered, but I pushed on. Around midday, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned shack. It looked like it had been empty for years, but I went inside, desperate for shelter. The shack provided little comfort. The roof leaked, and the floor was covered in dirt and debris. I found an old, rusted canteen and hoped there was still water in it. It tasted foul, but I drank it anyway. I needed to stay alive. Days passed in a blur. I rationed the little water I had and ate whatever scraps I could find. I kept hoping someone would find me, but no one came. My strength was fading, and I knew I couldn't last much longer. On the 5th day, I heard a noise outside the shack. I crawled to the door and saw a figure in the distance. Summoning all my remaining energy, I shouted for help. The figure turned and started running towards me. As they got closer, I saw it was a young woman with a backpack. She looked shocked to see me. She gave me water and food, and I told her my story. She was a backpacker, like me, and had gotten lost while hiking. We decided to stick together and try to find our way back. With her help, we navigated through the bush, finding signs of a trail. After 2 days, we stumbled upon a ranger station. The rangers were surprised to see us and quickly provided medical attention. They contacted the local authorities, and I was taken to a nearby hospital to recover. As I lay in the hospital bed, I reflected on my ordeal. The friendly local who had abandoned me was nowhere to be found. The ranger said it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. I was grateful to be alive, but the experience had changed me. I eventually made it back home, safe but scarred. The outback was no longer the adventure I had dreamed of. It was a harsh, unforgiving place that had nearly taken my life. It was supposed to be a peaceful night in the remote part of the Ozarks. I parked my camper van by the edge of a dense forest, looking forward to a quiet evening under the stars. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I noticed movement in the trees, shadows flitting in and out of view. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the hours passed, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. I heard footsteps outside my van, slow and deliberate, as if someone was trying to be stealthy. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered out the window, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever was lurking in the darkness. To my horror, I saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line, watching me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't make out their features in the dim light, but I could feel their gaze boring into me. I tried to convince myself that it was just a curious local, maybe a hunter or a hiker passing through. But deep down, I knew that something was seriously wrong. There was an air of menace about the figure, a sense of danger that I couldn't ignore. I debated whether to call out to them, to confront them and demand to know what they wanted. But fear held me back, the knowledge that I was alone in the middle of nowhere with no one to help me if things went south. As the night dragged on, the figure continued to watch me from the shadows, their presence a constant source of dread. I tried to distract myself, to focus on anything other than the creeping sense of fear that threatened to overwhelm me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted, that I was nothing more than prey to whatever lurked in the darkness outside my van. Hours passed in agonizing silence, each minute stretching into eternity as I waited for the first light of dawn to break through the trees. And when it finally did, I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that I had survived another night. But as I prepared to leave the safety of my van and venture out into the daylight, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a low, guttural growl, the sound of something primal and predatory. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as I realized that I was not alone. Whatever had been stalking me in the night was still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. With trembling hands, I reached for the keys to my van, my fingers fumbling with the lock as I desperately tried to get inside. But before I could escape, I felt a pair of eyes watching me from the darkness, their gaze burning into my soul with a hunger that chilled me to the bone. And then, without warning, the figure stepped out from the shadows, revealing themselves in all their terrifying glory. It was a man, his face twisted into a sinister grin as he advanced towards me with slow, deliberate steps. I knew in that moment that I was in grave danger, that this man meant me harm and would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. I scrambled to start the engine of my van, my heart racing as I prayed for a miracle. But as the man drew closer, I knew that I was running out of time. With one final burst of adrenaline, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal and peeled out of the campsite, leaving the man behind in a cloud of dust and gravel. As I drove away from the scene, my heart still pounding in my chest, I vowed never to return to that remote part of the Ozarks again. My family decided to have a reunion at our lake house in Minnesota. It had been years since we were all together, and the idea of spending a week by the lake sounded perfect. The house was big, with plenty of rooms and a great view of the water. My grandfather, the family patriarch, was especially excited. He loved having everyone around. We arrived on a sunny afternoon, and everyone started catching up. There was a lot of laughter and good food. The first couple of days were relaxing. We swam, fished, and took long walks. Everything seemed perfect, but I noticed some tension between my Uncle Dave and my grandfather. They were often whispering in heated conversations. One evening, I couldn't sleep and went downstairs to get some water. As I walked past the study, I heard voices. My Uncle Dave was talking to someone on the phone. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough to understand he was talking about my grandfather and money. He sounded angry and desperate. I felt a chill run down my spine but decided to keep quiet and go back to bed. The next day, things seemed normal, but I couldn't shake off what I heard. I started paying more attention to my uncle. He was always watching my grandfather, especially when he was near the lake. It made me uneasy. I confided in my cousin Sarah, and she told me she had also noticed something strange about Dave. We decided to keep an eye on him together. That night, we stayed up late, pretending to watch TV, but really, we were listening for anything unusual. Around midnight, we heard the back door creak open. We peeked out the window and saw Dave heading towards the lake. We followed him quietly, staying hidden in the shadows. He stopped at the dock and pulled out a small bottle from his pocket, pouring its contents into my grandfather's drink bottle that he always took on his morning walks. My heart was racing. We ran back to the house and debated what to do. We couldn't confront him without proof, and we didn't want to cause a scene without being sure. We decided to wait until morning and warn my grandfather. At dawn, we found my grandfather in the kitchen, getting ready for his walk. We told him what we saw, and he was shocked but believed us. He asked us to stay quiet and let him handle it. He took his drink bottle and walked out as usual, but instead of heading to the lake, he went to my dad's room and showed him the bottle. My dad took the bottle to a friend in town who worked at a lab. By afternoon, we had confirmation the bottle contained poison. My grandfather called a family meeting, and with everyone gathered, he confronted Dave. At first, Dave denied everything, but when my dad showed him the lab results, he broke down and confessed. He admitted he was in serious debt and needed the inheritance. The police were called, and Dave was taken away. The family was in shock. We never imagined something like this could happen. My grandfather was shaken but relieved that we had stopped Dave before he could do anything worse. The rest of the reunion was somber. We all felt the weight of what could have happened. My grandfather was grateful to us for paying attention and acting on our instincts. The family came together in a way we hadn't before, supporting each other through the ordeal. I left the lake house with a mix of emotions. The place I always associated with happy memories now had a dark shadow over it. But I also felt a strong bond with my family, knowing we had protected one another. It was supposed to be a simple night of stealth camping in the dense forests of Vermont. Just me, my trusty van, and the tranquil beauty of nature surrounding me. But as darkness fell and the world outside my van grew quiet, I sensed that something was amiss. I had just settled down for the night when I heard a rustling outside, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching my van. My heart skipped a beat as I peered out the window, trying to make out the figure in the darkness. To my horror, I saw a man standing outside my van, his face obscured by shadows. He looked disheveled and desperate, like he had been on the run for days. And when he caught sight of me, his eyes widened with recognition, as if he had been expecting me all along. Before I could react, he banged on the door of my van, demanding that I let him in. His voice was urgent and panicked, sending a chill down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but the desperation in his voice was impossible to ignore. With a trembling hand, I unlocked the door and let the man inside. He wasted no time in scrambling into the van, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he collapsed onto the floor. His whole body was trembling with fear, and I could see the wild look of terror in his eyes. As he caught his breath, the man explained that he was a fugitive, on the run from the authorities for a crime he claimed he didn't commit. He begged me to help him escape, promising that he would pay me handsomely for my assistance. I was torn. On one hand, I sympathized with the man's plight. But on the other hand, I knew that helping a fugitive could land me in serious trouble with the law. I tried to reason with him, to convince him to turn himself in and face justice, but he was adamant. With no other options, I reluctantly agreed to help the man escape. We drove through the night, sticking to back roads and deserted highways in an effort to avoid detection. Every sound outside the van made my heart race, fearing that we would be discovered at any moment. But despite our efforts to remain undetected, it wasn't long before we attracted the attention of the authorities. Flashing lights appeared in the rearview mirror, and I felt a sinking sensation in the pit of my stomach as a police car pulled us over. Panic surged through me as the officer approached the van, his hand resting on his holster as he eyed us suspiciously. I glanced at the fugitive sitting beside me, his face pale with fear, and knew that our time was running out. With a sinking feeling, I realized that I had no choice but to come clean. I explained the situation to the officer, hoping against hope that he would show mercy and let us go. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that our fate was sealed. The officer placed the fugitive under arrest, reading him his rights as he cuffed his hands behind his back. I watched helplessly as they led him away, knowing that I had failed to save him from his fate. As I drove away from the scene, the weight of guilt hung heavy on my shoulders. I had tried to do the right thing, but in the end, it wasn't enough. The night was dark and silent, with only the distant hum of the city outside to keep me company. I was alone in my apartment, nestled in the heart of the bustling city, surrounded by the comforting glow of streetlights filtering through my windows. But as I settled into bed, a strange noise broke the silence, echoing up from the depths of the basement below. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than the creaks and groans of an old building settling into the night. But as the minutes ticked by, the noise grew louder, more insistent, until I could no longer ignore it. With a sense of trepidation knotting in my stomach, I climbed out of bed and made my way down the stairs to investigate. The basement was dark and musty, the air heavy with the scent of damp concrete. As I flicked on the light switch, I was greeted by the sight of empty boxes and forgotten belongings strewn haphazardly across the floor. But as I scanned the room, my heart skipped a beat as I caught sight of a shadowy figure lurking in the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of old furniture. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that I was not alone. With a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins, I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the intruder's form. I knew that I had to act fast if I wanted to survive this encounter. As I reached the top of the stairs, I made a split-second decision and darted into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer and prepared myself for whatever lay ahead. As I crept back towards the basement door, I could hear the sound of footsteps echoing up from below, growing louder with each passing second. With a deep breath, I flung open the door and charged down the stairs, ready to face whatever awaited me in the darkness. But as I reached the bottom, I was met with an empty room, the intruder nowhere to be seen. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that they must have slipped away in the chaos, leaving me alone once more. With a sense of relief washing over me, I made my way back upstairs and locked the basement door behind me, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in the silence of the night. But even as I settled back into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, my senses on high alert, listening for any sign of the intruder's return. But as the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, I knew that I had survived the night, the danger passing as quickly as it had come. As the days passed, I tried to put the encounter behind me, chalking it up to nothing more than a trick of the mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me, lurking in the shadows just out of sight. And as I lay awake in bed each night, listening to the sounds of the city outside, I couldn't help but wonder if the intruder was still out there. Working the night shift at the pharmacy was usually pretty quiet. I spent most of my time stocking shelves, filling prescriptions, and keeping an eye on things. But lately, things had been getting a little weird. I had been noticing that certain medications were going missing: painkillers, sleeping pills, stuff like that. At first, I thought maybe I had miscounted or misplaced them, but it kept happening, night after night. I started to get suspicious, wondering if someone was stealing the meds. But I couldn't figure out how they were doing it. The pharmacy was locked up tight at night, and there were security cameras everywhere. One night, I decided to stay late and try to catch whoever was behind it. I hid in the back room, waiting and watching for any sign of movement. Sure enough, around midnight, I heard a noise coming from the front of the store. I crept out of the back room, my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the front counter. There, standing behind the counter, was a man I had never seen before. He was rummaging through the shelves, grabbing bottles of pills and stuffing them into his pockets. I felt a surge of anger coursing through me as I realized what was happening. This guy was the one stealing the medications, and he had been doing it right under my nose the whole time. I knew I should have called the police right then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the adrenaline pumping through my veins, or maybe it was just sheer stupidity, but I decided to confront him instead. I stepped out from behind the counter, my hands trembling with fear and anger. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty store. "What do you think you're doing?" The man spun around, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw me standing there. For a moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us sure what to do next. Then, without warning, he lunged at me, his fists flying. I barely had time to react, ducking out of the way just in time to avoid his blows. We grappled with each other, stumbling around the store in a frantic dance of violence. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, dulling the pain of each blow as we fought. But I knew I couldn't keep it up forever. The man was bigger and stronger than me, and it was only a matter of time before he overpowered me. I needed to end this, and fast. With a surge of determination, I managed to land a solid punch to his jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. I didn't stick around to see if he was okay. I grabbed my phone and called the police, telling them everything that had happened. They arrived quickly, and together we were able to apprehend the man and take him into custody. It turned out he had been stealing the medications to sell on the black market, a desperate attempt to make some quick cash. In the end, I was hailed as a hero for stopping him. But as I lay in bed that night, my body bruised and sore from the fight, I couldn't shake the feeling of fear that lingered in the back of my mind. I had come face to face with danger that night, and I had survived. But I knew that not everyone was so lucky, and that the world could be a much scarier place than I had ever imagined. I was camping alone on a cliffside in Wales, enjoying the solitude and the breathtaking view of the rugged coastline below. It was a remote spot, far from any towns or villages, but I liked it that way. I had everything I needed: a tent, a sleeping bag, some food and water, and a sense of adventure. One evening, as the sun was setting, I noticed a figure approaching my campsite. At first, I thought it might be another hiker, but as he got closer, I realized there was something off about him. He moved with a strange, jerky gait, and his eyes darted around nervously. "Hello there," he said, his voice high-pitched and shaky. "Mind if I join you for the night?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. He seemed harmless enough, but there was something about him that set off alarm bells in my head. Still, I didn't want to be rude, so I reluctantly agreed. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The man didn't say much, but whenever I tried to make conversation, he would just stare at me with those unsettling eyes. I started to regret letting him into my campsite, but there wasn't much I could do about it now. Eventually, I decided to turn in for the night, hoping that sleep would bring some relief from my growing anxiety. I crawled into my sleeping bag and closed my eyes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to the sound of rustling outside my tent. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, straining to hear any movement. Then, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone unzipping the tent flap. I froze, my mind racing with fear. Who was it? What did they want? I tried to stay calm as I waited for them to make their move. "Time to go," a voice whispered from outside the tent. It was the man from earlier, and he sounded angry. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my things and scrambled out of the tent, my heart pounding in my chest. The man was standing there, his eyes blazing with fury. "You can't leave," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Not until I say so." I didn't stick around to find out what he meant. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my feet slipping on the rocky ground as I made my way down the cliffside. I could hear him behind me, shouting and cursing, but I didn't dare look back. I reached the bottom of the cliff and kept running, not stopping until I reached the nearest town. I found a police station and told them what had happened, and they promised to send someone out to investigate. I spent the rest of the night in a hotel room, unable to sleep for fear that the man would find me. But when morning came, there was still no sign of him. The police searched the area but found no trace of the man or his campsite. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I never went camping alone again, and I always made sure to tell someone where I was going and when I expected to be back. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't managed to escape. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget the terror of that night, alone on a cliffside in Wales, with a madman on the loose. We were driving late at night, heading through a remote area when we decided to stop at a small, rundown motel. It was the only place for miles, and we were exhausted. The neon sign flickered, and the parking lot was nearly empty. We checked in and got our key from the old man at the front desk, who barely looked up from his book. Our room was shabby but clean enough. As we unpacked, I heard a faint noise outside. At first, I thought it was a cat or some other animal. But then I heard it again, a soft, muffled cry. I looked at my partner, Mark, and he nodded. We both went outside to investigate. In the corner of the parking lot, near a broken-down car, we found a small bundle. It was an infant, wrapped in a dirty blanket. The baby was crying softly, its little face red and scared. My heart sank. Who would leave a baby out here like this? We picked up the baby and hurried back to our room, trying to calm it down. We needed to call the authorities, but there was no cell signal in this remote area. The only option was the phone in our room. I dialed the front desk, but there was no answer. Mark decided to go to the office to get help. I stayed in the room, rocking the baby and trying to keep it calm. Minutes passed, and I started to worry when Mark didn't come back. The baby's cries grew louder, and I felt more and more uneasy. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer. I wrapped the baby up again and went to find Mark. The hallway was dimly lit, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I reached the front desk, but it was empty. The old man was gone, and there was no sign of Mark. I heard a noise coming from behind the desk, like something being dragged. I walked around and saw a door slightly ajar. Inside, there was a staircase leading down. I hesitated but then heard a muffled cry for help. It was Mark. I descended the stairs, holding the baby close. The basement was cold and dark. I saw a light under a door at the far end. I moved quietly, trying not to make any noise. When I reached the door, I peeked through the crack. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were several children, all locked in cages. Mark was tied to a chair, and the old man from the front desk was talking to another man. They were discussing the shipment and how they needed to move the children soon. I realized with horror that we had stumbled upon a child trafficking ring. I backed away slowly, trying to think of a plan. I had to get Mark and the children out, but I couldn't do it alone. I decided to go back to our room and look for something that could help. On my way back, I found a fire extinguisher in the hallway. It wasn't much, but it was something. I returned to the basement door and waited for the right moment. The old man and his partner were busy, so I quietly opened the door and slipped inside. I went to Mark first and used the extinguisher to break the ropes binding him. He was weak but managed to stand. We moved quickly, opening the cages and freeing the children. We had to be quiet, but some of them were so scared they started to cry. The men heard the noise and turned around. I raised the extinguisher and sprayed it in their faces, buying us a few precious seconds. We ran up the stairs, the children following closely. I slammed the door shut behind us and jammed a chair under the handle to buy us more time. We ran out into the parking lot, desperately looking for help. Just then, A car pulled in, and I waved frantically. The driver saw us and stopped. We explained the situation quickly, and he called the police. It felt like an eternity before they arrived, but when they did, they swarmed the motel. The 2 men were arrested, and the children were taken to safety. Mark and I were shaken, but we stayed to give our statements. The police thanked us for our bravery and told us that the traffickers had been wanted for a long time. They had been using the remote motel as a front for their operations. That night, as we finally drove away from that horrible place, we held hands tightly, the baby's cries still echoing in our ears. We knew we had done the right thing, but the memory of those terrified children would stay with us forever. We promised each other that we would always be vigilant and never ignore a cry for help, no matter how small. I took a job as a park ranger in Yellowstone. I needed a change from my usual routine, and the idea of spending a summer in nature sounded perfect. The park was beautiful, and I loved my job. Most days were peaceful, just guiding tourists, checking trails, and enjoying the scenery. One evening, I was patrolling a less traveled part of the park. It was getting dark, and I was about to head back when I heard something strange. It sounded like a gunshot, which was unusual and alarming. Hunting was strictly prohibited in the park. I decided to check it out, thinking maybe it was a misfire from a camper, though that was unlikely. I followed the sound through the trees, moving quietly. After about 10 minutes, I saw a light ahead and crouched behind some bushes. There were 2 men standing around a campfire, talking in hushed tones. Between them, on the ground, was a large dead elk. They were clearly not supposed to be there. One of the men was cleaning a rifle, while the other was packing up their gear. They looked serious and focused. I knew I had to report this, but my radio was back in the truck. I slowly started to back away, trying not to make any noise. But then I stepped on a branch, and it snapped loudly. Both men looked up instantly. "Who's there?" one of them shouted, grabbing his gun. I froze, heart pounding. They started walking towards my direction. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush. I heard them shouting and the crack of a gunshot. My only thought was to get back to the truck and call for help. The forest was dense, and it was hard to move quickly, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I stumbled into a small clearing and saw the faint glow of the park road up ahead. I was close. Another shot rang out, and I felt a sharp pain in my arm. I bit down a scream and kept running. When I finally reached my truck, I threw myself inside and locked the doors. My arm was bleeding badly, but I managed to grab the radio and call for backup. I could hear the men shouting in the distance, but I didn't wait to see if they were coming closer. I started the truck and drove as fast as I could back towards the ranger station. The pain in my arm was getting worse, but I couldn't stop now. When I arrived at the station, a couple of other rangers were already there. I explained what happened, and they called for more help. I was taken to the small medical clinic in the park, where they treated my arm. The bullet had just grazed me, but it was still deep enough to need stitches. Later that night, the park was swarming with law enforcement. They found the campfire and the remains of the elk, but the poachers were long gone. I gave my statement to the police, describing the men as best as I could. They promised to increase patrols and keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. The rest of the summer, I was more on edge. Every sound in the forest seemed louder, every shadow more threatening. I kept my radio close and stuck to the main trails as much as possible. It was hard to relax after that night. By the end of the season, the poachers still hadn't been caught. The memory of that night stayed with me, a constant reminder of how quickly things could turn dangerous. I finished my job and went back to my regular life, but I never forgot the terror of being hunted in those dark woods. I had been looking for a vintage guitar for a while, something with character and a bit of history. Craigslist seemed like a good place to start, so I spent a few evenings browsing through ads. One night, I found a listing that caught my eye. A beautiful 1960s Gibson, reasonably priced. I contacted the seller immediately. The guy's name was Rick. He responded quickly, and we arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Austin. When I got there, Rick was already waiting, guitar in hand. He seemed friendly enough, a bit rough around the edges, but nothing too alarming. The guitar was in great condition, just as the ad had described. We chatted for a bit, and after some negotiation, I handed over the cash and took the guitar. As I was leaving, Rick asked if I lived nearby. I mentioned I was just a few miles away, in an attempt to make small talk. He nodded and said he hoped I enjoyed the guitar. I thought nothing of it and went on my way. When I got home, I couldn't wait to play. The guitar sounded amazing, even better than I had hoped. I spent the next few hours lost in music, completely forgetting about the world outside. It was late when I finally put the guitar down and decided to call it a night. As I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like someone was moving around near my driveway. I peeked through the blinds and saw a shadowy figure near my car. My heart started racing. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal or maybe a neighbor, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I turned off all the lights and stayed quiet, watching the figure. After a few minutes, the person moved closer to the house. I could see them more clearly now. It was Rick. He was trying to look through the windows, checking if anyone was home. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator about the intruder. They told me to stay calm and stay on the line until the police arrived. Rick started to move towards the back door, jiggling the handle. I could hear him cursing under his breath. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't get in. The minutes felt like hours. Then, I heard sirens in the distance. Rick must have heard them too because he bolted, running back towards the street. I stayed on the line until the police arrived, explaining everything to them as best as I could. The officers searched the area but didn't find Rick. They took my statement and assured me they would patrol the neighborhood for the next few nights. They advised me to keep my doors and windows locked and to call them if I saw anything suspicious. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every little noise made me jump. I decided to take some time off work and stay with a friend for a few days. I didn't feel safe at home. While I was away, I got a call from the police. They had caught Rick. Apparently, he had tried to pull the same stunt on someone else, but this time, the person fought back and managed to detain him until the cops arrived. They found several stolen items in his possession, including a few guitars. Hearing this brought some relief, but I still felt uneasy. I went back home, changed all the locks, and installed a security system. It took a while to feel comfortable in my own house again. The experience left me shaken, but it also made me more cautious. From then on, I was careful about who I dealt with, especially online. I never met strangers alone, always choosing public places with lots of people around. The guitar, as beautiful as it was, became a reminder of that terrifying night. I kept it, but every time I played, I couldn't help but think about how close I came to real danger. In the end, I was lucky. I got out safe, and Rick was caught. I thought I got a great deal on the used phone. It was a sleek model, barely a year old, and the price was too good to pass up. I bought it from a guy who seemed friendly enough. He told me he was upgrading and didn't need it anymore. I didn't think twice about it. The first couple of days, everything was fine. I set up my apps, transferred my contacts, and got used to the new features. But then, late one night, I received a text from an unknown number. It said, "Where's the money?" I assumed it was a wrong number and ignored it. The messages kept coming, each one more aggressive than the last. "You can't hide forever," one said. Another read, "We know who you are." My heart pounded every time my phone buzzed. I finally replied, telling them they had the wrong person. The response was immediate and chilling. "We know you have the phone. Bring the money or else." I felt a cold sweat break out. I tried to call the guy who sold me the phone, but his number was disconnected. Panic set in. I didn't know what to do. I went to the police, but they said without more information, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to change my number. That night, I decided to turn off the phone and get a new number in the morning. I tried to sleep, but every noise outside made me jump. Around midnight, I heard a loud bang on my front door. My blood ran cold. I crept to the window and peeked out. There were two men standing on my porch, looking angry and impatient. I backed away, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. Then, my phone buzzed again. I had forgotten to turn it off. The message said, "Open the door, or we'll break it down." I felt trapped. I considered calling the police again, but I was too scared to make any noise. The banging continued. I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. I grabbed the phone and texted back, "I don't have your money. I just bought this phone." There was a long pause, then a reply, "Prove it." I frantically searched for the receipt from the guy who sold it to me, but I couldn't find it. I sent another message, "Please, I swear I'm telling the truth." The banging stopped, but I could hear them talking outside. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it didn't sound good. Then, another message came through, "You have 1 hour to find the money, or we'll be back." They left, but I knew they weren't bluffing. I spent the next hour trying to think of what to do. I decided to go to a friend's house and figure things out from there. I grabbed a few things, including the phone, and slipped out the back door. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those men following me. When I got to my friend's place, I explained everything. She was shocked and let me stay the night. The next morning, we went back to my house to get more of my things. The front door had been kicked in, and the place was trashed. They had been looking for something, and it wasn't there. I called the police again, and this time they took it seriously. They found fingerprints and other evidence, but the men were long gone. They told me to stay with my friend while they investigated. I changed my number and got a new phone, but I was still scared. Every time a text came through, I jumped. Weeks passed, and the police didn't find the men. I moved to a new apartment and tried to put it behind me. But the fear stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that they might find me again. Every time I heard a knock on the door, my heart skipped a beat. The ordeal changed me. I used to feel safe in my own home, but now I always felt like I was being watched. I was out stealth camping in my van in the Colorado Rockies, seeking some peace and solitude away from the hustle and bustle of city life. It was supposed to be a simple retreat into nature, a chance to disconnect and recharge. But what I found there was far from peaceful. The first night went by without incident. I parked my van in a secluded spot, nestled among the trees, and settled in for the night. The sounds of the forest surrounded me, soothing in their familiarity. I felt safe and at ease, cocooned in the warmth of my sleeping bag. But as the days passed, I began to notice things that didn't quite add up. Small, subtle signs that someone else was nearby. Footprints in the dirt that weren't mine, branches snapped in a way that suggested they had been deliberately broken. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the days went by, the signs became harder to ignore. One evening, as I was cooking dinner over the campfire, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as I strained to listen for any sign of movement. But the forest was silent, save for the crackling of the flames. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, a deer or a bear passing through. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Someone was out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. I spent the rest of the night on edge, jumping at every sound, every shadow. I didn't sleep a wink, too afraid of what might happen if I let my guard down even for a moment. The next morning, I decided to confront whoever was out there. I packed up my things and set out into the forest, determined to find out who was watching me and why. I didn't have to look far. Just a few hundred feet from my campsite, I stumbled upon a makeshift shelter hidden among the trees. It was crude but sturdy, made from branches and tarpaulin, camouflaged to blend in with the surrounding foliage. My heart raced as I approached the shelter, my mind buzzing with fear and uncertainty. Who was living here? And why were they watching me? I called out, hoping to coax whoever was inside to reveal themselves. But there was no answer, just the eerie silence of the forest. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Should I go inside and confront them? Or should I turn around and run as fast as I could back to my van? In the end, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped forward, my hand shaking as I reached out to pull back the flap of the shelter. What I found inside chilled me to the bone. The shelter was empty, save for a few tattered blankets and scraps of food. But scrawled on the walls in thick, black letters were the words, "I see you." I stumbled back, my stomach churning with fear and dread. Who had written those words? And what did they mean? I didn't stick around to find out. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced back to my van. I didn't stop until I was safely locked inside, the engine running as I sped away from the place as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the memory of those words burning in my mind. I see you. It was a chilling reminder that even in the most remote corners of the world, we are never truly alone. I never went back to that spot in the Colorado Rockies. The memory of what happened there still haunts me to this day, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurk just beyond the edge of our comfort zone. But I've learned to be more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. And as long as I keep moving forward, I know I'll be okay. I was on a guided safari in South Africa, excited to see the wildlife up close. We were in a large group, riding in an open-top jeep, with our guide explaining the different animals and plants. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the sounds of birds and insects. I had my camera ready, hoping to capture some great shots. We stopped at a clearing to take some photos of a herd of elephants in the distance. Our guide told us to stay close, but I wandered a bit to get a better angle. I didn't realize how far I had gone until I couldn't hear the voices of the group anymore. When I turned around, the jeep was gone. Panic set in as I realized I was alone. I started walking in the direction I thought they had gone, but the landscape looked the same in every direction. The sun was beginning to set, and I knew I needed to find them before dark. My heart was pounding, and I felt the fear rising. I shouted for help, but there was no response. As I was walking, I heard voices. Relieved, I headed towards the sound, thinking I had found my group. But as I got closer, I realized these were not the voices of my fellow tourists. These were rough, angry voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. I crouched behind some bushes and peered through the leaves. I saw a group of men with rifles, standing around a jeep. They were talking heatedly and gesturing towards something on the ground. My blood ran cold when I saw the carcass of a rhinoceros, its horn sawed off. These were poachers, and they had just killed the animal. I knew I had to get away before they saw me. I started to back away slowly, but I stepped on a dry twig, and it snapped loudly. One of the men turned towards the sound. I froze, hoping he wouldn't see me. But he did. He shouted to the others, and they all looked in my direction. I bolted, running as fast as I could through the dense brush. I could hear them shouting and the sound of their footsteps behind me. My mind was racing, trying to think of a way out. I knew if they caught me, I wouldn't survive. I stumbled through the undergrowth, branches scratching my face and arms. I could hear them getting closer, their voices growing louder. My lungs were burning, but I couldn't stop. I spotted a large tree with low branches and scrambled up, hoping they wouldn't see me. I held my breath, trying to stay as still as possible. The men ran past, not noticing me hidden in the foliage. I waited until I couldn't hear their voices anymore before climbing down. I knew I couldn't stay there. They would come back and find me. I started moving again, more cautiously this time. I kept to the shadows, trying to stay hidden. The sun had set completely, and the darkness made it even harder to navigate. I tripped over roots and rocks, my fear growing with each passing minute. Eventually, I heard the sound of running water. I followed it, thinking it might lead me to safety. I found a small stream and drank deeply, trying to calm my nerves. I sat by the water, trying to think of my next move. My mind was clouded with fear and exhaustion. As I sat there, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching. I looked around frantically, trying to find a place to hide. But it was too late. The poachers had found me. They surrounded me, their faces twisted with anger. One of them grabbed me by the arm and yanked me to my feet. He shouted something in my face, but I couldn't understand. He pointed his rifle at me, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me. I thought this was the end. But then, I heard another voice shouting in the distance. The poachers looked up, their expressions changing from anger to fear. I realized it was the voice of my guide, calling out for me. The poachers exchanged glances and then fled into the night. Moments later, my guide and the rest of the group burst through the trees. They were shouting my name, and I cried out in relief. The guide ran over to me, asking if I was okay. I was shaking, but I managed to nod. We made our way back to the jeep, and I couldn't stop shaking. The guide explained that they had noticed I was missing and had been searching for me. I told them about the poachers, and the guide reported it to the authorities. That night, back at the lodge, I couldn't sleep. The fear and adrenaline were still coursing through me. I kept thinking about how close I had come to not making it out alive. The experience had shaken me to my core. The authorities assured us they would investigate the poachers, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I was grateful to be safe, but I knew I would never forget the terror of that night in the South African wilderness. It was supposed to be a scenic route, but the storm turned it into a nightmare. The sky was dark, and the rain made it hard to see. My wipers were going full speed, but it didn't help much. I had been driving for hours and was exhausted. The storm showed no signs of letting up, so I decided to find a place to wait it out. I spotted an old, rundown cabin a little ways off the road. It looked abandoned, but at that moment, any shelter was better than staying in the car. I pulled up close to the cabin and ran inside, hoping to escape the rain. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and musty, but at least it was dry. I could hear the rain pounding on the roof, but it felt good to be out of the storm. I walked around, trying to get a sense of the place. There were some old, broken down furniture pieces and a fireplace filled with ash. It definitely seemed abandoned. I found a corner to sit in, wrapped my arms around myself, and tried to relax. A few minutes later, I heard a noise from another room. My heart skipped a beat. I thought I was alone. I stood up slowly and listened. The noise came again, like someone moving around. Panic set in. I had to get out of there. I moved quietly towards the door, but before I could reach it, a man stepped out from the shadows. He was tall, with a rough look about him, and his clothes were dirty and torn. He had a wild look in his eyes. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. I didn't know anyone was here. "I'll leave," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head. "You're not going anywhere." My heart raced as he moved closer. I backed up, trying to keep some distance between us. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. The blade glinted in the dim light. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing the knife at me. I did as he said, my mind racing. I needed to think of a way out. He watched me closely, never lowering the knife. He looked desperate, like a cornered animal. "Why are you here?" he demanded. "I was just trying to get out of the rain," I explained, hoping he would believe me. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded. "You're not lying, are you?" I shook my head. "No, I'm not." He seemed to relax a little, but he didn't put the knife away. "I'm not going back to prison," he said, more to himself than to me. I realized then that he must be a fugitive. My chances of getting out alive seemed slim, but I had to try to keep him calm. "I won't tell anyone you're here." "I just want to leave," I said softly. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. "You're not going anywhere until the rain stops. And if you try to run, I'll kill you." I nodded, trying to hide my fear. I had to stay calm and think of a way out. The hours passed slowly. He paced around the cabin, always keeping an eye on me. The rain continued to pour outside, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. As night fell, he seemed to grow more agitated. He kept muttering to himself, and I could see the strain in his eyes. I needed to take advantage of his distraction. He finally sat down, still holding the knife, but his grip was looser. I waited for a moment when he seemed particularly lost in thought, then made my move. I grabbed a heavy piece of wood from the floor and swung it at his head with all my strength. He went down, dropping the knife. I didn't wait to see if he was out cold. I grabbed the knife and ran out of the cabin, into the pouring rain. The darkness and rain made it hard to see, but I ran as fast as I could, fueled by fear. I stumbled through the mud and water, not sure where I was going. I just needed to put as much distance between us as possible. Eventually, I found the road and followed it until I saw headlights in the distance. I waved my arms frantically, hoping it was someone who could help. The car stopped, and the driver rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. I nodded, out of breath. "There's a man in the cabin. He's dangerous." Please, call the police." He nodded and let me into the car, handing me his phone. I called 911 and told them everything. They assured me that help was on the way. We waited in the car until the police arrived. They found the man in the cabin, unconscious but alive. They took him into custody, and I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. The police took my statement and made sure I was okay before letting me go. I continued my journey, but the memory of that night stayed with me. The rain, the fear, and the desperation in that man's eyes haunted my dreams for a long time. I was lucky to get out alive, but I'll never forget how close I came to losing everything in that old, abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere. I've always been handy with tools, so I decided to start my own handyman service in Houston. I listed my services online, hoping to get some extra income. It didn't take long before I got a call from a guy named Mr. Reynolds. He said he had a few odd jobs around his house and needed someone to come by. When I got to the address, it was a big house in a quiet neighborhood. Mr. Reynolds was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with a friendly smile. He greeted me at the door and invited me in. He showed me a few things that needed fixing: a leaky faucet, a loose doorknob, and a squeaky floorboard. I got to work right away. Everything seemed normal at first. Mr. Reynolds was pleasant, offering me coffee and chatting about mundane things. But after a while, I noticed he was watching me a bit too closely. It made me uneasy, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just particular about his house. As I was fixing the floorboard, he suddenly stood right behind me. I turned around, startled, and he hit me on the head with something heavy. Everything went black. When I came to, I was tied to a chair in a dimly lit basement. My head throbbed, and I felt disoriented. Mr. Reynolds was standing in front of me, no longer smiling. He looked menacing, a stark contrast to the friendly man I had met earlier. He told me he needed money and that I was his ticket to getting it. He was going to hold me for ransom, he said, and if I cooperated, I wouldn't get hurt. Panic set in. I told him I didn't have much money, but he didn't care. He was planning to contact my family or anyone who might pay for my release. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. He gagged me and left the basement, locking the door behind him. I was alone, tied up, and terrified. I had to find a way out. I struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. The basement was cold and damp, with a faint smell of mold. I looked around, trying to find something I could use to free myself. There was a rusty nail sticking out of one of the beams nearby. If I could just reach it. I managed to tip the chair over, landing hard on my side. The pain was intense, but I ignored it and focused on the nail. It took a lot of effort, but I finally managed to cut through the ropes. My hands were raw and bleeding, but I was free. I got up slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible. I needed to find a way out of the basement. There was a small window high up on one wall, but it was too small to climb through. The only way out was the door Mr. Reynolds had locked. I searched the basement for anything I could use as a weapon. There was a broken pipe on the floor, heavy and jagged. I picked it up and crept towards the door. I had to be ready if he came back. Hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes. Time seemed to stretch in that dark, cold basement. Finally, I heard footsteps upstairs. The door creaked open, and Mr. Reynolds walked in, holding a phone. He didn't see me at first. I was hiding behind some old boxes. As he stepped further into the basement, I took a deep breath and swung the pipe with all my strength. It hit him in the back, and he fell forward, dropping the phone. I didn't wait to see if he was unconscious. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding. I burst out of the basement and into the main part of the house. I could see the front door, but I heard Mr. Reynolds groaning behind me. I ran to the door, fumbling with the lock, and finally managed to get it open. I sprinted down the street, not looking back. I found a neighbor's house and banged on the door until someone answered. They called the police, and I was finally safe. The police arrived and arrested Mr. Reynolds. It turned out he had done this before, targeting handymen and other workers who came to his house. I was lucky to get out alive. Now, I'm more cautious about the jobs I take. I had this old dining set I wanted to sell. It was too big for my apartment, and I needed the space for a home office. So, I listed it on a local classifieds website. Within a day, I got a message from a guy named Tom. He seemed nice enough, said he was moving into a new place and needed some furniture. We agreed on a price, and he asked if he could come by to see it. I wasn't too worried about having him over. It was broad daylight, and my neighborhood was usually pretty safe. When he showed up, Tom looked pretty normal. Mid-30s, well-dressed, polite. We chatted a bit about the dining set, and he seemed genuinely interested. He asked if he could see the rest of my apartment to get an idea of the space it might fit in. I felt a bit uneasy but didn't want to seem rude, so I agreed. As we walked around, he made small talk. Asked about my job, how long I'd lived there, stuff like that. It seemed harmless, but something about his questions felt off. He lingered a bit too long in certain rooms, looking around more than necessary. After a while, he said he liked the dining set and would get back to me about buying it. I felt relieved when he left. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. There was something in his eyes, a calculating look that I couldn't shake off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the visit in my head, thinking about the way he had looked at my apartment. I started to worry he wasn't just interested in the furniture. The next day, I decided to call him and tell him the set was no longer for sale, but he didn't answer. I left a message, trying to sound casual. A couple of days passed, and I started to relax. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Then, one night, I heard a noise outside. It was around midnight, and my neighborhood was usually dead quiet at that hour. I got out of bed and listened. There it was again, a faint scraping sound, like someone was trying to pry open a window. My heart started pounding. I crept to the living room and peeked through the blinds. In the darkness, I could make out a figure crouched by the side of my apartment, near one of the windows. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was Tom. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was trying to break into my home. The operator told me to stay on the line and stay quiet. I did my best to keep calm, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The scraping noise stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving around to the back of the apartment. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't have a back door, just a small window in the kitchen that led to the fire escape. I moved as quietly as I could to the kitchen and peeked out. Tom was there, trying to force open the window. I ducked down, my breath coming in short, terrified gasps. The operator assured me the police were on their way, but it felt like an eternity. I heard a loud crash and realized Tom had broken the window. I had to do something. I grabbed a heavy frying pan and stood near the kitchen door, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear him climbing through the window, muttering to himself. Just as he was about to step into the kitchen, I heard sirens in the distance. Tom froze. The sirens got louder, and I heard the sound of car doors slamming. Tom cursed and scrambled back out the window. I stayed hidden until I heard the police shouting for him to stop. Minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find 2 officers standing there. They had Tom in handcuffs. One of the officers explained that they had caught him trying to run. They found a bag in his car with tools for breaking and entering, along with a list of addresses. Mine was at the top. I gave my statement to the police, explaining everything that had happened. They assured me Tom would be charged and that I would be safe. It was a long night, and even after the police left, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how close I had come to being a victim. In the days that followed, I installed better locks and got a security system. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but gradually, the fear started to fade. My friend Sarah and I decided to take a break from the city and go camping in the Appalachian Mountains. We had an old camper van and thought it would be perfect for some stealth camping in a remote part of the mountains. We wanted peace and quiet, away from everything. We arrived in the late afternoon and found a secluded spot off a dirt road. It was a beautiful place, surrounded by trees and far from any other people. We set up a small campfire, cooked some dinner, and settled in for the night. The sky was clear, and the stars were shining brightly. After dinner, we decided to take a short walk around the area before going to bed. The forest was quiet, and we enjoyed the sounds of nature. As we walked back to the van, we noticed a truck parked on the dirt road, not far from where we were camping. It seemed out of place, but we didn't think much of it. Back at the van, we locked the doors and got ready for bed. We were both tired from the day's drive and hike. Just as we were about to fall asleep, we heard footsteps outside the van. At first, we thought it might be an animal, but then we heard voices. "Hey! Who's in there?" a man shouted, banging on the side of the van. We froze, unsure of what to do. "Go away!" Sarah shouted back, trying to sound brave. But the banging continued, louder this time. "Open up," another voice demanded. "This is private property. You need to leave." I peeked out the window and saw 3 men standing outside. They looked rough and angry. One of them had a baseball bat, and another was holding a flashlight, shining it into the van. "We're not causing any trouble," I said, trying to reason with them. "We'll leave first thing in the morning." "Not good enough," the first man said. "Get out now, or we'll make you." Fear gripped us both. We didn't want to confront them, but we didn't have much choice. Sarah and I exchanged a glance, then slowly opened the door, stepping out into the cold night. The men surrounded us, their expressions hostile. "What are you doing here?" the man with the bat asked, his tone threatening. "We're just camping," Sarah said. "We didn't know this was private property." "Well, now you know," he sneered. "And we don't want you here." "Look, we'll pack up and leave right now," I said, trying to stay calm. "Too late for that," another man said. "You should have left when we first told you." One of the men grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her towards the truck. "Hey! Let her go!" I shouted, stepping forward. The man with the bat raised it, and I froze. "You're not going anywhere until we say so," he said, his eyes cold. They forced us into the back of the truck and drove off, deeper into the mountains. We had no idea where they were taking us, and the fear was overwhelming. The truck finally stopped, and they dragged us out, throwing us to the ground. "Maybe this will teach you to stay away," one of them said, kicking dirt at us. They left us there, alone and scared, and drove off. We were miles from our van, in the middle of nowhere. Sarah was shaking, and I felt sick with fear. We had no choice but to start walking, hoping to find our way back. The forest was dark, and every sound made us jump. After what felt like hours, we finally saw the faint glow of our campfire in the distance. We hurried towards it, desperate to get back to the safety of the van. When we arrived, we quickly packed up our things, not wanting to risk another encounter with those men. We drove through the night, not stopping until we reached a small town. We found a motel and checked in, both of us too shaken to sleep. The reality of what had happened started to sink in, and we couldn't stop trembling. The next morning, we reported the incident to the local authorities, but they didn't seem too interested. They took our statement but said there wasn't much they could do without more information about the men. We decided to cut our trip short and head back home. The experience had left us both traumatized, and we couldn't shake the fear that something like that could happen again. The mountains, once a place of beauty and peace, now felt dangerous and hostile. Back home, we couldn't stop thinking about the men and what might have happened if we hadn't managed to escape. It took weeks for us to feel safe again, and we vowed never to go camping in such remote areas without better protection. The trip had changed us both. We learned to be more cautious, more aware of our surroundings, and never to take our safety for granted. I decided to explore a cave in the Appalachian Mountains. I had always been into hiking and exploring, and this was supposed to be an exciting adventure. I'd heard about this cave from a local, who said it was off the beaten path and not many people knew about it. That sounded perfect to me. The hike to the cave took most of the morning. The path was narrow and winding, and I had to climb over rocks and fallen trees. By the time I reached the entrance, I was tired but eager to explore. The cave mouth was wide, and I could feel the cool air coming out of it. I switched on my flashlight and stepped inside. The cave was bigger than I expected. The walls were damp, and the ground was uneven. I moved slowly, watching my step. The air was cool, and it smelled like earth and moss. The deeper I went, the darker it got, and soon the only light was from my flashlight. I felt a sense of excitement and a bit of fear, too. It was just me in the cave. I had been inside for about an hour when I heard voices. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard them again, clearer this time. Men's voices echoing through the tunnels. I froze, my heart pounding. Who would be down here? I turned off my flashlight, not wanting to be seen. The darkness was complete, and I felt my way to the wall, pressing against it. The voices were getting closer. I could hear them talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. As they got nearer, I could hear the clinking of metal and the thud of footsteps. I peeked around the corner and saw them. There were 3 men, all armed. They had flashlights and were carrying bags. They looked rough, like they had been hiding out for a while. I realized I had stumbled onto something dangerous. These men weren't just explorers like me. They were using the cave as a hideout. I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't let them see me. I waited until they moved past, then slowly started to backtrack. My heart was racing, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see them following me. I moved as quietly as I could, but every sound seemed magnified in the silence of the cave. I was almost to the entrance when I heard a shout behind me. They had noticed something was off. I broke into a run, not caring about the noise anymore. The entrance was in sight, but I heard them coming after me. Their footsteps echoed, getting louder and closer. I burst out of the cave and into the daylight, my eyes struggling to adjust after the darkness. I didn't stop running. I headed down the mountain, stumbling over rocks and roots. I could hear them behind me, yelling at each other. They were fast, and I knew I had to find a place to hide. I spotted a thicket of bushes and dove into it, crouching down and trying to control my breathing. The men ran past, still shouting. I stayed hidden, not daring to move. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. After a few minutes, their voices faded, but I didn't come out right away. I waited, making sure they were really gone. When I finally crawled out of the bushes, I was scratched and covered in dirt, but I was alive. I needed to get back to town and tell someone what I'd seen. I started moving again, this time more carefully. I didn't want to run into them on the way down. It took me a few hours to reach the trailhead. The whole time, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting them to jump out at me. When I got to my car, I didn't waste any time. I drove straight to the nearest town and found the police station. I told them everything about the cave and the men. They listened and took notes, then said they would check it out. They thanked me and told me to stay in town until they had investigated. I agreed, too shaken to argue. That night, I stayed in a motel, unable to sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind, wondering how close I had come to being caught. The next day, the police told me they had found the cave and the men who were wanted for several crimes. They had been using the cave as a hideout for weeks. Knowing they were caught helped me feel a bit safer, but the experience stayed with me. I had always loved exploring, but now I was more cautious. I still hiked, but I stayed on well-known trails and avoided going off alone. The mountains, which had once seemed so inviting, now felt a bit more dangerous. But I learned a lot from that experience. I learned to trust my instincts and to be aware of my surroundings. And I learned that even in the most beautiful places, danger can be lurking. I never went back to that cave, and I never told anyone else about it. The memory was enough, and the lesson it taught me was one I wouldn't forget. It's a big world out there, and not everything in it is safe. But with caution and awareness, I knew I could still find the beauty without putting myself in harm's way again. Working as a security guard at the warehouse was usually uneventful. My shifts were long and mostly quiet, but I liked the solitude. It was a huge place, filled with rows of crates and boxes stacked high. I'd walk the aisles, making sure everything was secure. Most nights, nothing happened. One night, I was patrolling the north section, which was supposed to be empty. It was a new part of the warehouse that wasn't in use yet. I walked down the long, dimly lit aisle, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The silence was comforting, a break from the usual hum of machinery. As I reached the far end, I heard a faint noise. It was like a soft thud, followed by muffled voices. I stopped, holding my breath, listening. The noises were coming from behind a stack of crates. My first thought was that it might be some animals that got in, but the voices were unmistakably human. I felt a chill run down my spine. This area was supposed to be empty. No one was allowed back here. I radioed in, but the static on the other end told me I was out of range. I decided to check it out myself before raising the alarm. I crept closer, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I rounded the corner, I saw a faint light spilling out from behind a stack of crates. I moved slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. When I peeked around the crates, I saw them. There were 5 men, all armed. They had set up a small camp with laptops and equipment that looked expensive. They were talking in hushed tones, focused on their screens. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was clear they were up to something illegal. I backed away slowly, trying to stay out of sight. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I needed to get out of there and call for help. As I turned to leave, my foot hit a loose piece of metal, and it clanged loudly against the concrete floor. The men looked up instantly, their eyes scanning the darkness. I froze, hoping they hadn't seen me. One of them barked an order, and two of the men started moving towards me, their guns drawn. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty aisles. I could hear them behind me, shouting for me to stop. I took a sharp turn and ducked behind a stack of boxes, trying to catch my breath. I needed to find a way out before they caught up to me. I looked around, my mind racing. There was a side door not too far from where I was hiding. If I could make it there, I might be able to get out and call for help. I peeked out from behind the boxes, seeing the men searching the area, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I waited until they moved further down the aisle before making a break for the door. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my ears. I reached the door and pushed it open, slipping outside into the cold night air. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. The operator answered, and I quickly explained the situation. They assured me that help was on the way. I stayed outside, hidden in the shadows, waiting. It felt like an eternity before I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. I saw the red and blue lights flashing as the police cars pulled up. The officers got out and moved into the warehouse, their guns drawn. I stayed hidden, watching as they went in. It wasn't long before they came back out with the men in handcuffs. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the tension drain from my body. One of the officers came over to me, asking if I was all right. I nodded, still shaken but grateful they had arrived. I explained what had happened, and they took my statement. They told me that the men were part of a smuggling ring and had been using the warehouse as a base of operations. They had been looking for them for a while. I thanked the officers and watched as they took the men away. I knew it would be a long night of paperwork and questions, but I was just glad it was over. The warehouse felt different now, less safe. I knew I would never forget what happened that night. It was just like any other night. I had finished editing some photos from a shoot and decided to unwind in the comfort of my loft apartment. The soft glow of the city lights seeped through the windows, casting shadows on the exposed brick walls. As I made my way to the bathroom to freshen up before bed, something caught my eye, a small, black object tucked away in the corner near the ceiling. Curiosity piqued, I approached cautiously, reaching out to inspect it. My heart skipped a beat when I realized what it was, a camera. Hidden in plain sight, its lens pointed directly at the bathtub. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched for any more of these devices. Sure enough, I found them. Hidden cameras strategically placed throughout my apartment, in the living room, the bedroom, even the kitchen. My sanctuary had been violated, and I felt exposed, vulnerable. Who could have done this? How long had they been watching me? Questions swirled in my mind as I grappled with the invasion of privacy. With trembling hands, I disconnected each camera, trying to regain a sense of control over my own space. But the damage had been done, the sense of security I once felt in my home shattered. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even after removing the cameras. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of my eye, sent shivers down my spine. Sleep eluded me that night. Instead, I lay awake, my mind racing with paranoia and fear. Who was behind this? Were they still watching me, even now? The next day, I reached out to the authorities, filing a report and installing security measures in an attempt to protect myself. But the sense of unease lingered, a constant reminder of the violation I had experienced. Days turned into weeks, and still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I found myself avoiding certain rooms in my apartment, unable to escape the sense of paranoia that hung in the air like a thick fog. Then, one night, I heard a soft, staticky noise coming from the speakers of my television. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as I realized what was happening. Someone was watching me. Through the very devices meant to keep me safe, they were taunting me, reminding me that they were still out there, still watching, still waiting. I felt sick to my stomach as I unplugged the television, cutting off the source of the intrusion. But the damage had been done. The feeling of being violated, of being exposed, lingered like a stain that couldn't be washed away. I tried to go about my life as usual, but the constant fear gnawed at me, eating away at my sense of security. I couldn't relax, couldn't let my guard down, for fear of what might happen if I did. Weeks turned into months, and still, the surveillance continued. I found myself looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, unable to escape the feeling of being watched, even in the most mundane moments of my daily life. Then, one day, I received a package in the mail, a small, nondescript box with no return address. Heart pounding, I hesitantly opened it, revealing a single, ominous message scrawled on a piece of paper inside. "You can't hide from me," it read. "I'm always watching." Terror gripped me as I realized that the nightmare was far from over. Whoever was behind this was still out there, still tormenting me, still waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But I refused to be a victim. With a newfound sense of determination, I reached out to the authorities once again, vowing to put an end to the surveillance once and for all. It wasn't easy, but eventually, with the help of the police, I was able to track down the person responsible. A former acquaintance with a grudge, seeking revenge for some perceived slight. As they were taken away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, and I could reclaim my life, my privacy, my sanity. But the scars of the experience would linger long after the cameras were gone, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of my reality. So, me and my wife were on this road trip, just trying to get away for a bit and enjoy some time together. We'd been driving for a while, and everything was going great until we noticed this truck behind us. At first, we didn't think much of it. I mean, it's not unusual to see other vehicles on the road, right? But as we kept driving, we started to realize that this truck wasn't just following us, it was tailgating us, getting closer and closer with each passing mile. I tried to shake it off, speeding up a bit and then slowing down, but no matter what I did, the truck stayed right on our tail, like it was glued to our bumper or something. My wife started to get really freaked out, and I have to admit, I was starting to feel pretty nervous myself. I mean, who follows someone like that, especially out in the middle of nowhere? We decided to pull off the highway at the next exit, hoping to lose the truck in the maze of side streets and back roads. But no matter where we went, the truck was right there behind us, like it was playing some twisted game of cat and mouse. By this point, my heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the panic rising in my throat. I didn't know what this person wanted from us, but I knew we had to get away from them, and fast. We kept driving, trying to put as much distance between us and the truck as possible. My wife was on the phone with the police, but out here in the middle of nowhere, it felt like we were on our own. Finally, after what felt like hours of tense silence, we spotted a gas station up ahead. We pulled in, hoping that maybe the presence of other people would scare off our pursuer. But as we got out of the car and headed inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the truck parked out front, but it was nowhere to be seen. We hurried inside, trying to act casual even though every instinct was screaming at us to run. My wife went to use the restroom while I paid for the gas, and I tried to keep an eye on the door, just in case. But when my wife came out of the restroom, she was pale as a ghost. She whispered something to me, her voice barely audible over the sound of the cashier ringing up our purchase. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what she was saying. The truck, it was parked outside, waiting for us. We were trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to help us. I quickly paid for the gas and grabbed my wife's hand, pulling her towards the door. We had to get out of there, before whoever was in that truck caught up to us. We burst out of the gas station and ran to our car, throwing ourselves inside and slamming the doors shut behind us. I started the engine and peeled out of the parking lot, not caring about the screeching tires or the startled looks of the people inside. As we sped away from the gas station, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the truck pulling out onto the road behind us, its headlights shining like the eyes of some predatory beast. But this time, we weren't going to let it catch us. We drove faster than we ever had before, pushing our car to its limits as we raced towards the safety of the nearest town. And finally, after what felt like an eternity of terror, we saw the lights of civilization up ahead. We pulled into the town, breathing a sigh of relief as we left our pursuer behind us. We called the police as soon as we arrived, reporting the truck and giving them as much information as we could. But by the time they arrived at the gas station, the truck was long gone, disappearing into the night like it had never been there at all. We never did find out who was driving that truck or what they wanted from us. But one thing's for sure, we'll never forget the terror of being followed, hunted like animals on the open road. And we'll never take another road trip without looking over our shoulders, wondering if our pursuer is still out there, waiting for us to let our guard down once again. It was a rainy night, the kind where the sound of the rain hitting the windshield drowned out everything else. I was driving, navigating the slick roads with caution, when I got a notification on my phone, a new ride request. I pulled over to the curb and waited, my windshield wipers swishing back and forth as I scanned the street for any sign of my passenger. And then, out of the darkness, I saw him, a man standing on the corner, his hood pulled up against the rain. He climbed into the back seat without a word, his movements smooth and practiced. I greeted him with a polite smile, but he didn't return it, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the steady rhythm of the rain on the roof of the car. But as we neared his destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him fidgeting in his seat, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just nodded curtly and looked away. As we pulled up to his destination, he suddenly asked me to keep driving, his voice low and urgent. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but before I could respond, he reached forward and grabbed the steering wheel, his grip like iron. I tried to wrestle control back from him, but he was too strong, his hands like vice grips as he forced the car off the road and into the darkness beyond. I shouted for help, but the rain drowned out my cries, the sound of the storm swallowing them whole. I struggled against him, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer as we careened off the road and into the wilderness beyond. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a glimmer of light up ahead, like a beacon in the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the door and leaped out into the night, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, the sound of his laughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran until I thought my lungs would burst, until I collapsed onto the ground in exhaustion and despair. But even then, I didn't give up. I crawled, I stumbled, I dragged myself forward inch by agonizing inch until finally, mercifully, I reached the safety of the road once more. I flagged down the first passing car I saw, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I begged them for help. They listened in horror as I recounted my ordeal, their eyes wide with disbelief. They drove me to the nearest police station, where I told my story to the authorities in painstaking detail. They promised to do everything in their power to find the man who had attacked me and bring him to justice. And though I knew it would be a long and difficult road ahead, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since that fateful encounter on that rainy night. So, I gotta share this crazy thing that happened to me. I work as a social worker, and one day, I had to drive out to this remote farmhouse to check on a family in trouble. Seemed routine enough, you know? Anyway, I hop in my car and head out there. The drive was long, and the farmhouse was out in the middle of nowhere. I remember feeling kinda uneasy as I got closer, like something just wasn't right. When I finally pull up to the house, though, my heart drops. It's quiet, too quiet. And there are signs of a struggle everywhere, broken furniture, stuff knocked over, you name it. I start to get this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I've stumbled into something way worse than I bargained for. But I push those thoughts aside and try to focus on what I need to do. I get out of my car and cautiously approach the house. The door's wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. I call out, but there's no response, just silence. I step inside, and that's when things start to get really messed up. The place is a wreck, like a tornado came through or something. And there's blood, lots of it, splattered all over the walls and floor. My heart's racing now, and I can feel the panic rising in my chest. I know I should call the cops, but something's holding me back. Maybe it's the fear of what I might find, or maybe it's just shock. I start to search the house, calling out for anyone who might still be there. But there's nobody, just me and the eerie silence. Then, out of nowhere, I hear this faint sound coming from upstairs, like someone crying. My blood runs cold as I slowly make my way up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I reach the top and follow the sound to one of the bedrooms. And that's when I see her, a young girl, huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. I rush over to her, asking if she's okay, but she's too scared to even speak. I try to comfort her as best I can, promising that everything's going to be all right. But deep down, I know it's not. I can feel it in my bones. Whatever happened here, it's not over yet. I scoop the girl up in my arms and make a run for it, not stopping until we're far away from that godforsaken place. I call the cops and tell them everything, praying that they'll be able to make sense of the nightmare I just stumbled into. They arrive soon after, and I hand the girl over to them, feeling like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. But as I watch them drive away, I can't shake the feeling that this is far from over. I may have escaped with my life, but the horrors of that farmhouse will haunt me forever. And I can only hope that whoever did this pays for their crimes, so that no one else has to suffer the way that poor family did. I was home alone for the weekend while my parents were away, and I was looking forward to having the house to myself. It was a typical suburban house, with nothing out of the ordinary, and I felt safe and comfortable there. As the evening rolled around, I decided to relax in my room, scrolling through my phone and listening to music. Everything seemed normal until I received a text message from an unknown number. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was probably just a wrong number or a spam message. But then I read the contents of the message, and a chill ran down my spine. The message was simple but chilling. I'm watching you. I felt my heart race as I looked around my room, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Who could be sending me such a creepy message? And how did they know I was home alone? I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and convince myself that it was just a prank. But then another message came through. this time more sinister than the last. I know you're alone. You should be scared. My hands were shaking as I typed out a response, demanding to know who was behind the messages. But there was no reply, just an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I felt a growing sense of dread as I realized that whoever was sending the messages wasn't just playing a harmless prank. They were actively threatening me, and I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I was receiving creepy text messages from an unknown number? It sounded ridiculous, and I didn't want to waste their time. Instead, I decided to barricade myself in my room, locking the door and pushing a heavy dresser in front of it. I felt a little safer knowing that I had taken some precautions, but the fear still gnawed at me. As the night wore on, I tried to distract myself by watching TV and reading a book, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house and every rustle of the wind outside sent my heart racing. Then, just as I was starting to relax a little, another text message came through, this one more menacing than the last. You can't hide from me. I'm coming for you. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I realized that whoever was sending the messages wasn't just trying to scare me. They were planning something far more sinister, and I was their target. I considered calling the police again, but I knew that I couldn't wait for them to arrive. I needed to get out of the house, to find somewhere safe where I could call for help. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and crept out into the hallway, trying to move as quietly as possible. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deafening in the stillness of the night, and I was sure that whoever was after me could hear every sound. I made my way downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the front door. But just as I was about to open it, I heard a noise behind me, a soft footstep that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned around slowly, my breath catching in my throat as I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, his face obscured by the darkness, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and unfeeling. I wanted to scream, to run as fast as I could and never look back. But fear held me rooted to the spot, and I could only watch in horror as the man stepped forward into the light. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness without a trace. I stood there for a moment, my heart still racing, before finally gathering the courage to run out the front door and into the safety of the night. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's house, where I pounded on the door until they answered. I must have looked a mess, my hair disheveled and my eyes wide with fear, but they didn't ask any questions. They just let me in and called the police. The officers arrived a short time later, and I told them everything that had happened, from the chilling text messages to the mysterious figure in the shadows. They promised to investigate, but I could tell that they didn't take me seriously. In the end, they never found out who was behind the messages or what their intentions were. But I know one thing for sure, I'll never forget the terror of that night. I was out on a wilderness expedition, just me and the vast expanse of the forest stretching out before me. I'd been trekking through the woods for days, relying on my survival skills to navigate the rugged terrain. But as I ventured deeper into the forest, I started to notice something strange, markings carved into the trees, like some kind of twisted trail marker. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than the work of a bored hiker, but the further I followed the trail, the more ominous it became. The markings seemed to lead deeper into the heart of the forest, away from the safety of the main trail. But I couldn't resist the urge to follow them, my curiosity getting the better of me. As I pushed deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with tension, like a storm brewing on the horizon. I felt a sense of unease settle over me as I realized that I was now alone in the forest. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go on, I stumbled upon a clearing in the trees, a clearing that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. In the center of the clearing stood a makeshift campsite, with a fire pit surrounded by discarded cans and bottles. But what caught my eye was the figure standing at the edge of the clearing, a man dressed in camouflage, his eyes gleaming with madness. He was armed with a rifle, and his gaze locked onto me with a predatory intensity. Panic surged through me as I realized that I had stumbled upon a deranged hunter's territory. He had been tracking me, leading me into his deadly trap with those twisted trail markings. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before he caught up to me, and I became his next target. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. But the hunter was hot on my heels, his shouts echoing through the forest as he pursued me. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning with exertion as I struggled to put distance between us. I didn't dare look back as I ran, the fear and panic driving me forward. It felt like hours before I finally emerged from the trees, gasping for breath and covered in sweat. But even as I collapsed on the forest floor, relief flooding through me, I knew that I couldn't rest for long. The hunter was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his chance to strike. With a shaky breath, I forced myself to stand and keep moving, determined to outwit him and escape with my life. It was a race against time, a battle of wits between me and the deranged hunter who stalked the forest like a predator. I pushed aside my fear and pressed on, my senses on high alert as I navigated the treacherous terrain. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a shiver down my spine as I searched for a way out. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a break in the trees up ahead, a glimmer of light that promised safety and salvation. With renewed determination, I pushed myself towards it, ignoring the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm me. And then, finally, I burst through the trees and into the open air, gasping for breath as I emerged into the daylight. I collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and shaken, but alive. I had escaped the clutches of the deranged hunter. I had been working the graveyard shift at the diner for about 6 months. The hours were long and the pay wasn't great, but it was a job. The place was usually quiet at night, mostly truckers and night owls stopping by for a quick meal. I liked the solitude and the routine. It was a Tuesday night, around 2 a.m., when a group of 5 men walked in. They were loud, laughing and talking in hushed tones that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They looked out of place, dressed too nicely for our little diner. I put on my best smile and walked over to their table with a notepad. "Evening, gentlemen. What can I get for you?" I asked. They barely glanced at the menu. "Coffee, and keep it coming," one of them said. His voice was sharp, commanding. The others nodded in agreement. I poured their coffee and went back to the counter, keeping an eye on them. They seemed restless, looking around the diner as if expecting someone. The atmosphere felt tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the night wore on, they started to get more aggressive. They laughed louder, made crude jokes, and began harassing the other customers. A couple at a nearby table tried to ignore them, but the men wouldn't leave them alone. One of the men, the one who had ordered the coffee, got up and walked over to the couple. "You two having a nice night?" he asked, his tone mocking. The couple looked uncomfortable, and the man put his arm around the woman, pulling her closer. I knew I had to do something. I walked over and tried to intervene. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave them alone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned to me, a cold smile on his face. "Or what?" he asked, taking a step closer. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Or I'll call the police," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. He laughed. "Go ahead. I'd love to see them try and do something about it." The other men at the table laughed too, egging him on. I backed away, my heart pounding. I went to the counter and picked up the phone, dialing 911. As the phone rang, I saw one of the men stand up and walk towards me. I turned away, hoping the police would answer quickly. 911, what's your emergency? The operator said. I spoke quickly, trying to keep my voice low. I'm at the diner on Route 5. There's a group of men here harassing customers. I need help. The man was getting closer. I turned to face him, holding the phone tightly. Put the phone down, he said, his voice cold. I did as he said, my hands shaking. The operator was still on the line, but I couldn't speak. The man leaned over the counter, his face inches from mine. You're making a big mistake, he said. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked back to his table. I picked up the phone again, whispering to the operator. Please hurry. The men continued their harassment, and I tried to keep the other customers calm. The couple eventually left, clearly frightened. It was just me and the group of men now. One of them got up and walked over to the jukebox, putting on some loud, thumping music. They started to dance, their movements erratic and wild. I stood behind the counter, watching them and praying the police would arrive soon. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of a police car outside. The men didn't seem to notice. I ran to the door and waved the officers in. They walked in, and the mood in the diner shifted instantly. The men stopped dancing and turned to face the officers. Is there a problem here? One of the officers asked. The man who had threatened me earlier stepped forward. No problem, officer. We're just having a good time. The officer looked at me, and I nodded slightly, letting him know that wasn't true. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, the officer said. The men grumbled but didn't argue. They slowly made their way out of the diner, throwing dirty looks over their shoulders. As soon as they were gone, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The officers stayed for a while, making sure everything was okay. I thanked them profusely, my hands still shaking. They told me to call if anything like that ever happened again and left. I sat down at the counter, trying to calm my nerves. The diner was quiet again, but the tension lingered in the air. I stayed on edge for the rest of my shift, jumping at every little noise. The night dragged on, and I couldn't wait for the morning to come. When my replacement finally arrived, I was exhausted but relieved. I told her what had happened, and she gave me a sympathetic look. You did the right thing, she said. I'm glad you're okay. I nodded, still feeling uneasy. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the men and how quickly things had escalated. I hoped I'd never have to deal with something like that again. The quiet of the night shift was no longer comforting. It was a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. When I got home, I collapsed into bed, too tired to even eat. I lay there in the dark, replaying the events of the night in my mind. I knew I'd never forget the look in that man's eyes or the way my heart had pounded in my chest. The graveyard shift would never feel the same again. I was driving down a lonely country road, the rain pounding against the windshield and the wind howling outside. The storm was raging, and the visibility was poor. I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I had to keep going. I was almost home, and I just wanted to get there safely. That's when I saw him, standing by the side of the road with his thumb out. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his skin, and his face hidden beneath the hood of his jacket. He looked like he had been out in the storm for hours, and I couldn't just leave him there. I pulled over and rolled down the window, offering him a ride. He climbed into the car without a word, his eyes hidden in the shadows of his hood. I tried to make small talk, asking him where he was headed and if he was okay, but he didn't respond. He just sat there in silence, staring out the window as the rain beat against the glass. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off as nerves. I told myself that he was probably just tired and cold, and that's why he wasn't talking. But as we drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He started to fidget in his seat, shifting around uncomfortably as if he couldn't get comfortable. His breathing grew heavy, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead, but the atmosphere in the car had changed. It was thick with tension, like a storm brewing beneath the surface. And then, out of nowhere, he snapped. He started shouting, his voice rising in anger as he accused me of all sorts of things. He said I was trying to hurt him, that I was plotting against him, that I was out to get him. I tried to calm him down, to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept yelling, his words filled with venom and hatred. I felt a surge of panic as I realized that I was alone in the car with a complete stranger who was clearly unstable. I didn't know what to do, where to go, how to escape. I just kept driving, hoping that I could get away from him before things got any worse. But he wasn't done yet. He lunged at me, grabbing the steering wheel and jerking it to the side. The car swerved off the road, skidding across the wet pavement and crashing into a ditch. I screamed as the airbags deployed, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I tried to push him away, to fight him off, but he was too strong. He pinned me against the seat, his hands around my throat, squeezing the life out of me. I struggled to breathe, my vision blurring as darkness closed in around me. But then, just when I thought it was all over, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I kicked and thrashed, clawing at him with all the strength I had left. And finally, miraculously, he let go. I gasped for air, coughing and sputtering as I fought to regain my breath. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before he could hurt me again. I unbuckled my seatbelt and scrambled out of the car, running as fast as I could through the rain and the darkness. I didn't stop until I was far away from him, far away from the nightmare that had almost cost me my life. I collapsed on the ground, shaking and sobbing as the adrenaline wore off and the reality of what had just happened sunk in. I was alive, but I was shaken to my core. I knew I would never forget the terror of that night, the fear of being trapped in a car with a madman. I checked into a small, rundown motel on the outskirts of town. I had been driving for hours and needed a place to rest. The man at the front desk, who introduced himself as Bob, seemed overly friendly. He asked a lot of questions about where I was coming from and where I was going. It felt strange, but I brushed it off as small talk. After checking in, I took my bags to my room. It was dingy and smelled a bit musty, but I was too tired to care. I put my things down and lay on the bed, thinking about the money I was carrying. I had sold my car earlier that day and had the cash in my bag. It was a lot of money, and I felt uneasy carrying it around, but I had no choice until I could deposit it the next morning. As I settled in, there was a knock on my door. It was Bob. He said he just wanted to make sure everything was all right with the room. I assured him it was fine, and he left, but not before glancing around the room in a way that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was too interested in me. I tried to relax and watch some TV, but I kept hearing footsteps outside my room. At one point, I looked through the peephole and saw another staff member, a woman, standing there. She seemed to be listening at my door. When she noticed me looking, she quickly walked away. My unease grew, and I decided to keep my door locked and stay alert. I thought about calling someone, but it was late, and I didn't want to alarm anyone without good reason. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but my gut told me something was off. Around midnight, I heard voices outside my room again. This time, it was Bob and the woman, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their tone was serious. I quietly moved closer to the door to listen better. "She's got a lot of cash," Bob said. "Saw it when she checked in. We need to move fast." My heart started pounding. They were planning to rob me. I needed to get out of there, but I had to be smart about it. I quickly gathered my things, making as little noise as possible. I remembered there was a back door near my room that led to the parking lot. It was my best chance to escape without running into them. I carefully opened my door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. I slipped out and headed towards the back door. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my keys. I finally got to the door and pushed it open, stepping into the cool night air. I hurried to my car, glancing over my shoulder. Bob and the woman hadn't noticed I was gone yet. I threw my bags in the back seat and got in, starting the engine as quietly as I could. Just as I was about to pull away, I saw Bob and the woman burst out the back door, looking around frantically. I floored it, speeding out of the parking lot and down the road. My heart was racing, and I kept checking my rearview mirror to make sure they weren't following me. I drove until I found a well-lit gas station, where I pulled over and took a moment to collect myself. I called the police and told them everything that had happened. They said they would send a patrol car to the motel to investigate. I waited at the gas station, feeling a mix of fear and relief. After a while, an officer called me back and said they had detained Bob and the woman for questioning. They found evidence that suggested they had done this before to other guests. I eventually found another motel and checked in, making sure it was a reputable place this time. I couldn't sleep much that night, still shaken from the experience. The next morning, I went to the bank and deposited the money, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Looking back, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts. It was a terrifying experience, but I got out safe. I learned to be more cautious and always trust my gut feeling. I never want to go through something like that again. I was working as a lifeguard at a beach in Florida last summer. It was a hot day, and the beach was crowded with families. The sun was shining, kids were playing in the sand, and people were swimming in the clear blue water. It seemed like just another typical day. Around midday, I noticed a group of men sitting on the beach. There were 4 of them, all in their late 30s or early 40s. They looked out of place. While everyone else was enjoying the sun or splashing in the water, these men were just sitting there, not talking much, just watching. At first, I thought they might just be friends hanging out, but something felt off. They weren't looking at the ocean or the scenery. They were watching the children. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, but I couldn't. I kept an eye on them, pretending to scan the beach as part of my usual routine. As the day went on, their behavior got stranger. They would whisper to each other, point subtly, and then split up, each man taking a different position around the beach. It was like they were forming a perimeter. My heart started to race. I had never seen anything like this before. I decided to get a closer look, so I walked down the beach, making it seem like I was just patrolling. When I got near one of the men, he glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I tried to stay calm, but the look in his eyes was chilling. It was like he knew I was onto him. I went back to my lifeguard stand and grabbed my binoculars. I scanned the beach, focusing on the men. They were definitely watching the kids. One of them even had a camera, pretending to take pictures of the ocean but clearly aiming it at the children. My stomach churned. I needed to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I couldn't just accuse them without proof. I decided to call the beach security. I explained what I had seen and my concerns. They said they would send someone over to check it out, but I could tell they weren't taking it as seriously as I was. Minutes felt like hours as I waited. I kept my eyes on the men, my heart pounding. They were getting bolder, moving closer to the kids. I saw one of them approach a group of children playing by the water. He knelt down, pretending to be friendly, talking to them. The kids didn't seem to sense any danger. Finally, I saw the security officer approaching. I waved him over and pointed out the men. He nodded and started walking towards them. As he got closer, the men noticed and began to scatter. My pulse quickened. They were trying to get away. The security officer managed to stop one of them, asking questions. The man was calm, too calm, like he had done this before. The other three were moving quickly, heading towards the parking lot. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my whistle and blew it, loud and sharp, to get everyone's attention. People looked up, startled. I shouted, "Watch your children. There are men trying to take them." Parents immediately gathered their kids, pulling them close. The beach was in chaos. The security officer called for backup, and more guards arrived. They managed to catch two of the other men before they reached their cars. The last one got away, running into the nearby streets. The police were called, and soon the beach was swarming with officers. The men were arrested and taken away. I later found out they were part of a child trafficking ring. The police said my quick thinking might have saved several children that day. It was a terrifying experience, and I couldn't shake the image of those men watching the kids. I was praised for my actions, but it didn't feel like enough. The thought of what could have happened still haunts me. I'm more vigilant now, always watching, always ready. That day changed me forever. I'm grateful those children were safe, but I know there are others out there who might not be so lucky. I had always been fascinated by ancient civilizations, so when I got the chance to join an archaeological dig in Egypt, I jumped at it. The dig site was near the Nile, not far from Luxor. It was an incredible opportunity, and I was eager to uncover pieces of history buried in the sand. The first few weeks were exciting but exhausting, as we worked long hours under the scorching sun. One afternoon, I was digging in a secluded part of the site when my trowel hit something solid. At first, I thought it was just another piece of pottery, but as I carefully uncovered it, I realized it was a small wooden box, intricately carved. My heart raced with excitement as I lifted it out of the ground. I called over my colleague, Dr. Ahmed, to take a look. Dr. Ahmed examined the box, his eyes widening. He said it looked like it might be from the late period of ancient Egypt, a rare find. We decided to open it carefully back at our makeshift lab. Inside, we found several small, well-preserved artifacts, jewelry, coins, and a few scrolls. It was an incredible discovery, one that could shed light on a lesser-known period of Egyptian history. That night, we celebrated our find with the rest of the team. Everyone was excited, and there was talk of contacting the authorities to document and secure the artifacts. But later, as I was packing up my tools, Dr. Ahmed pulled me aside. He looked worried and told me to keep quiet about the box for now. He had a feeling something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I noticed a few strangers hanging around the site. They didn't seem like tourists or locals, and they were definitely not part of our team. One evening, I overheard them talking in hushed tones near our camp. I couldn't make out everything, but I caught enough to know they were interested in the artifacts we had found. I confided in Dr. Ahmed about what I had heard. He looked even more concerned and told me he suspected they might be part of a smuggling ring. He had encountered similar situations before, where valuable artifacts were stolen and sold on the black market. He warned me to be careful and keep an eye on the box at all times. Things took a turn for the worse when, one night, I woke up to find the box missing from our lab. Panic set in. I rushed to Dr. Ahmed's tent, only to find it ransacked and nowhere in sight. Fear gripped me as I realized the smugglers had taken him, probably to force him to reveal the location of other valuable artifacts. I knew I had to act fast. I packed a small bag with essentials and decided to head to the nearest town to get help. As I slipped out of the camp, I heard voices behind me. I looked back and saw the same strangers, now armed and searching the area. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept through the darkness, trying to stay out of sight. I managed to make it to the edge of the camp and started towards the town, which was several miles away. The desert night was cold and eerie, with only the sound of my footsteps breaking the silence. After what felt like hours, I heard a vehicle approaching. I hid behind a dune, my heart racing, as a jeep drove past, its headlights scanning the area. I waited until the jeep was out of sight before continuing. My mind was racing with thoughts of Dr. Ahmed and what the smugglers might do to him. I had to find help, but I also had to avoid getting caught. The town was still a long way off, and I was already exhausted. Just as dawn was breaking, I reached the outskirts of the town. I headed straight for the local police station, hoping they would believe my story and act quickly. The officer on duty listened intently as I explained the situation. He seemed skeptical at first but agreed to send a few men to investigate. While we waited for the police to mobilize, I tried to contact Dr. Ahmed's family to let them know what was happening. They were understandably frantic and urged the police to act quickly. I felt a small sense of relief knowing that help was on the way, but I couldn't shake the fear that it might be too late. The police and I returned to the dig site in a convoy of vehicles. As we approached, we saw the smuggler's jeep parked near the entrance. The officers moved in quickly, surrounding the area and securing the site. After a tense search, they found Dr. Ahmed tied up in one of the tents, but thankfully unharmed. The smugglers were arrested, and the stolen artifacts were recovered. Dr. Ahmed and I gave our statements, detailing everything that had happened. It was a harrowing experience, one that left me shaken and questioning my decision to join the dig in the first place. In the days that followed, the site was secured, and additional measures were put in place to protect the artifacts. The local authorities worked with our team to ensure that everything was properly documented and preserved. Dr. Ahmed and I were hailed as heroes for uncovering the smuggling ring, but the ordeal had left its mark. I continued with the dig, but the excitement I once felt was now tinged with caution. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. The beauty of the ancient ruins was still there, but my view of the world had changed. I went stealth camping in the forests of Northern California. It was something I had done before, parking my van off a remote dirt road, away from any signs of civilization. The quiet and solitude of the forest were perfect for clearing my mind. This particular spot was deep in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and dense underbrush. The day was uneventful. I spent it reading, taking short walks, and enjoying the peacefulness. As the sun set, the forest grew darker, and the sounds of nature became louder. I prepared a simple dinner inside the van, locking the doors as a precaution. The isolation felt comforting but also a bit eerie as night fell. Around midnight, I heard a faint knock on the side of the van. Startled, I froze, listening intently. The knock came again, louder this time. I got up cautiously and looked out the small window. A man stood there, looking disheveled and lost. "Hello? Can you help me?" "I'm lost," he called out, his voice shaky. I hesitated, considering my options. He didn't look threatening, but the situation felt off. Against my better judgment, I opened the window slightly. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I've been wandering for hours. My car broke down, and I can't find my way back," he explained. He seemed desperate and scared. I decided to help but stay cautious. "Do you have a phone?" I asked. He shook his head. "No signal out here," he replied. I glanced at my phone and saw he was right. There was no service. I told him to wait while I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the van. The air was cool, and the forest was pitch dark. I kept a safe distance from the man as I spoke to him. "Where did you leave your car?" I asked. "Down the road, about a mile back," he said, pointing in a vague direction. "Can you give me a ride?" Something about his story didn't add up. Why would he be so far from his car in the middle of the night? But I couldn't leave him stranded if he was telling the truth. I decided to drive him to the nearest town, which was a good hour away. "Okay, get in," I said, opening the passenger door. He climbed in, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I started the van and began driving down the dark, narrow road. The man was quiet, staring straight ahead. After a few minutes, he spoke. "You shouldn't be out here alone." "It's dangerous," he said, his tone changing. There was something menacing in his voice now. I glanced at him, trying to stay calm. "I know how to take care of myself," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He smirked, and my heart started to race. Suddenly, he lunged at me, grabbing the wheel. The van swerved, and I struggled to maintain control. "What are you doing?" I shouted, trying to push him away. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, his grip tightening. I fought back, elbowing him in the ribs. He grunted but didn't let go. The van careened off the road, crashing into a tree. The impact dazed me, but I managed to unbuckle my seatbelt and scramble out of the van. The man was right behind me. I ran into the forest, branches scratching my face and arms. The darkness was disorienting, but I kept moving, fueled by fear. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. I stumbled over a root and fell, pain shooting through my ankle. I forced myself up and limped forward, knowing I couldn't stop. In the distance, I saw a faint light. I headed towards it, praying it was a way out. The light grew brighter, and I realized it was another camper, a small fire burning outside a tent. I burst into the clearing, shouting for help. A man emerged from the tent, startled. "What's going on?" he asked. Before I could answer, my pursuer appeared, his face twisted with rage. "She's mine," he screamed, lunging at me again. The camper reacted quickly, tackling him to the ground. They struggled, and I grabbed a nearby branch, hitting my attacker with all my strength. He collapsed, unconscious. The camper looked at me, breathing heavily. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "We need to tie him up," I said, my voice shaking. He found some rope in his tent, and we secured the man, making sure he couldn't escape. I explained what had happened as we waited for dawn. As soon as the sun rose, we hiked back to my van. It was damaged but drivable. The camper helped me load the unconscious man into the back, and we headed to the nearest town, where we reported the incident to the authorities. The police took him into custody and listened to my story. They told me he was a known criminal, wanted for several assaults in the area. I was lucky to have escaped with my life. The experience left me shaken. I realized how vulnerable I had been, and it took a long time for me to feel safe again. I learned to trust my instincts and be more cautious when camping alone. The forest, once a place of solace, now felt haunted by the memory of that night. I still loved the outdoors, but the sense of freedom was overshadowed by the fear of what could happen when you let your guard down. In the end, I was grateful for the camper who helped me and the lesson I learned. The world is full of dangers, and it's important to stay vigilant, even in places that seem peaceful and serene. I was living in Chicago with my baby daughter, Emma. Money was tight, so I turned to Craigslist to find a second-hand stroller. After a bit of searching, I found one that looked perfect and was within my budget. I contacted the seller, a woman named Susan, and we arranged to meet at her apartment. Susan's place was in a rougher part of town, but she seemed friendly enough. She showed me the stroller, which was in great condition. We chatted a bit about our kids, and she even gave me some baby clothes her daughter had outgrown. I paid her, thanked her, and headed home, feeling relieved to have found such a good deal. That night, I got a message from Susan asking if I got home safely. It seemed a bit odd, but I replied that I had and thanked her again. Over the next few days, I noticed a car parked across the street from my apartment. It was always there, and I started feeling uneasy. One evening, as I was putting Emma to bed, I heard a noise outside my window. I looked out and saw a man standing by the car, staring up at my apartment. I quickly closed the blinds and called my friend, Lisa. She offered to come over and stay with me, but I told her it was probably nothing. The next day, I went to the grocery store, and when I came out, I saw the same car parked near mine. The man was sitting inside, watching me. My heart raced as I hurried to my car, locked the doors, and drove home as fast as I could. I knew something was very wrong. That night, I heard noises outside my window again. I peeked through the blinds and saw two men in my yard. They were trying to break into my car. I grabbed my phone and called the police. They arrived quickly, but the men were gone by the time they got there. The officers took my report and promised to patrol the area more often. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "We know where you live. Don't call the cops again." I was terrified. I called Lisa and told her everything. She insisted I come stay with her for a while. I packed a bag for Emma and me, and we left that night. At Lisa's place, I felt a bit safer, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I didn't hear from Susan again, but I kept getting threatening texts from different numbers. I changed my phone number, but somehow they kept finding it. I knew I needed to do something. I went to the police again and told them everything. They took me seriously this time and assigned a detective to my case. He suggested I stay somewhere else for a while and promised to look into Susan and the men who had been stalking me. Lisa and I decided to go to our parents' cabin in Wisconsin. It was remote and felt like a safe place to hide. We stayed there for a few weeks, trying to get back to some sense of normalcy. The detective called me regularly with updates, but they hadn't found the men yet. One night, I woke up to the sound of a car outside the cabin. I looked out and saw the same car that had been parked outside my apartment. Panic set in as I grabbed Emma and woke Lisa. We called the police and hid in the bathroom, waiting for help to arrive. The police showed up and caught one of the men trying to break into the cabin. They arrested him, and after questioning him, they found out that Susan was part of a gang that used Craigslist to find new victims. They would lure people in with good deals, then target them for robbery or worse. With the information from the arrested man, the police were able to track down the rest of the gang, including Susan. They were all arrested and charged with multiple crimes. It was a long and stressful process, but I was relieved when they were finally behind bars. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city and took extra precautions to ensure our safety. I found this old bookstore downtown in Denver. It was one of those places that looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. Dusty shelves, creaky floors, and the smell of old paper. I loved it. I was hunting for a rare book I'd heard about, an obscure crime novel from the 1930s. I didn't really expect to find it, but I figured it was worth a shot. The owner was this old guy named Mr. Harris. He was friendly enough, and after chatting for a bit, he led me to a back room. It was darker back there, with stacks of books that looked like they hadn't been touched in ages. After some digging, he pulled out the book. It was exactly what I was looking for. I bought it and headed home, excited to start reading. The book was fascinating, a gritty story about crime and corruption. But something felt off. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed some strange markings. They were small, almost hidden in the margins. At first, I thought they were just random scribbles, but the more I looked, the more I realized they formed a pattern. I spent hours studying the markings. It felt like a puzzle, and eventually, I figured out they were some kind of code. I deciphered it, and what I found was shocking. The book wasn't just a novel, it was a record of real crimes. There were names, dates, locations, all pointing to a crime syndicate operating in Denver. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to go to the police, but I didn't know if I could trust them. What if they were involved? I decided to keep digging. Maybe I could find more clues, something that could expose the syndicate without putting myself in danger. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It started with little things, a car parked outside my apartment for too long, strangers giving me odd looks. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. One night, I was heading home from work when I noticed a man following me. He was dressed in dark clothes and kept a distance, but I knew he was watching me. I took a few detours, trying to lose him, but he stayed on my trail. I finally made it to my apartment and locked the door behind me, my heart racing. I peeked out the window and saw him standing across the street, staring up at my building. I called a friend, told them what was happening, and asked if I could stay at their place for a few days. They agreed, and I packed a bag, trying to calm my nerves. The next day, I went back to the bookstore to see Mr. Harris. I needed to know if he was aware of the book's hidden contents. When I arrived, the shop was closed. A for sale sign hung in the window. It didn't make sense. I had just been there a few days ago, and there was no mention of it closing down. I asked around the neighborhood, but no one knew what had happened to Mr. Harris. It was like he had vanished overnight. I was starting to feel like I was in over my head. The more I dug, the more dangerous it became. That night at my friend's place, I heard a noise outside. It was a soft scraping, like someone was trying to pick the lock. I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept to the door. The noise stopped, and I heard footsteps retreating. I looked through the peephole but saw nothing. The next morning, I found a note slipped under the door. It was a warning, telling me to stop looking into the book or there would be consequences. My friend was terrified and told me to go to the police. I knew I had to, but I was still scared they might be involved. I decided to take a chance and went to the local precinct. I asked to speak to a detective and told him everything. To my relief, he seemed genuinely concerned and agreed to help. He took the book and promised to look into it. For a few days, things seemed to calm down. I stayed with my friend, trying to return to some sense of normalcy. But then I got a call from the detective. He wanted to meet in person, said he had found something important. We met at a diner downtown. He looked nervous, glancing around like he was being watched. He slid a file across the table to me. Inside were documents and photos, evidence that tied the book to real crimes. But there was also something else. A list of names, including high-ranking officials and law enforcement. The detective told me we were in serious danger. The syndicate had people everywhere, and they would stop at nothing to get the book back. He said we needed to go into hiding, that he had a safe place where we could stay until it was safe to come out. We left the diner separately, trying to avoid drawing attention. I followed his instructions, meeting him at a remote cabin outside the city. It was isolated, surrounded by woods, a perfect place to lay low. For a while, it seemed like we were safe. But then one night, I woke up to the sound of cars approaching. The detective burst into my room, telling me to grab my things and run. The syndicate had found us. We bolted into the woods, the sound of footsteps and shouting behind us. I could barely see, my heart pounding in my chest. We ran for what felt like hours, until we stumbled upon an old abandoned shack. We hid inside, trying to catch our breath. The detective whispered that we needed to keep moving, but we were trapped. We heard them outside, searching the area. It was only a matter of time before they found us. The detective pulled out his gun, ready to defend us. Just as they were about to break in, we heard sirens. The real police had arrived, tipped off by a friend of the detective. There was a shootout, and after what felt like an eternity, it was over. The syndicate members were arrested, and we were safe. The detective and I were taken back to the city, where we gave our statements. The evidence from the book led to a massive investigation, bringing down the crime syndicate and exposing the corrupt officials. It was a terrifying experience, but in the end, justice was served. I moved to a small town in Wisconsin after I retired. The place was quiet, with friendly neighbors and a simple way of life. I spent my days gardening, reading, and walking around the neighborhood. It was a peaceful existence, just what I had been looking for. One day, while walking in the woods behind my house, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned barn. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. Curious, I decided to take a closer look. As I got nearer, I noticed something strange. There were fresh tire tracks leading up to the barn, and the padlock on the door looked new. I decided to come back later when it was dark, so I wouldn't be seen. That night, I put on my jacket and grabbed a flashlight. I felt a bit nervous, but my curiosity got the better of me. I walked through the woods, staying off the main path to avoid being seen. When I reached the barn, I noticed a faint light coming from inside. I crept up to the window and peeked inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were several men inside, packing large plastic bags full of what looked like white powder. There were guns on the table and large stacks of cash. It was clear I had stumbled upon a drug operation. I knew I had to tell someone. The next day, I went to the local police station. I asked to speak to someone in charge and told them everything I had seen. The officer listened but seemed uninterested. He took my statement but didn't seem to take it seriously. I left the station feeling uneasy, but I hoped they would investigate. A few days later, I noticed a black car parked outside my house. It was there every day, just sitting there with tinted windows. I couldn't see inside, but I felt like I was being watched. My phone started ringing at odd hours, and when I answered, no one was there. I began to feel paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder. One night, I heard a noise outside my window. I got up and looked out, but I couldn't see anything. Then, I heard footsteps on the porch. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my flashlight and went to the front door. I opened it slowly, shining the light outside. No one was there, but there was a note on the ground. It read, "Keep your mouth shut, old man." I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I was in danger. I tried to call the police again, but they dismissed it as a prank. I felt helpless and scared. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I packed a bag with some essentials and decided to leave town for a while. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, hoping to throw them off. I drove to a friend's cabin a few hours away, deep in the woods. I felt safer there, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One night, I heard a car pull up outside. I peeked out the window and saw the same black car. They had found me. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my bag and slipped out the back door, running into the woods. I could hear them shouting, their footsteps close behind me. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I tripped over a tree root and fell, scraping my hands and knees. I scrambled to my feet and kept running. I finally saw the lights of a nearby house. I banged on the door, begging for help. An older couple opened the door and let me in. I quickly explained my situation, and they called the police. The men in the black car drove off when they heard the sirens approaching. The police arrived and took my statement. This time, they took me seriously. They investigated the barn and found the drug operation. Several arrests were made, and the drug ring was shut down. The men who had threatened me were caught and taken into custody. I returned to my home in the small town, but things never felt the same. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me. The peaceful life I had once enjoyed was gone, replaced by fear and anxiety. But I was safe, and the drug operation was shut down. That was the only comfort I had left.